Good evening. I'd like to call to order the February 1st, 2023 regular planning commission for the city of Santa Monica. It is now 5:34. If we could have a roll call, please. Staff, I imagine you heard that. You're just getting your mics together or something?
Chair, do you want to call our roll so we can keep going?
I have no problem doing that. I'm just curious if staff has other problems, technical problems. And I guess just to move this along, I will go ahead and call Commissioner Fonda Bernardi.
Here.
Commissioner Fresco.
Here.
Commissioner Lambert is absent today. Commissioner Landris.
Here.
Commissioner Tolkien.
Here.
Vice Chair Raskin is also absent today, and Chair Reese is present. And I would like to move to the next item, which is the director's report. Staff could opine and let us know everything's okay on their end here.
I think Jing is sorting out some technical audio issues. Can you just give us a moment?
Okay, we'll do that.
Is this where they make us watch a health video while we wait for the teacher to come back?
We can't hear you yet, Jing. Still waiting.
Are you testing your headphones? Do you need us to talk?
Public, please bear with us. We're trying to work through a technical issue.
I had this problem the other week. The only thing I could do was literally shut down the whole program and start over again. I had to quit and completely log out and then log back in.
And try the chat function. It's for technical help.
I think she's the person giving the technical help.
Yeah. So as Jing's going to pull up the director's report slide, and I'll do my best to walk through it. So for the director's report, David Martin today is not available tonight, so I'll do my best to walk through it. On February 15th, you'll see the CUP for the 3016 Main Street project that was continued from the January 25th meeting. You'll also have the 638 11th Street appeal, as well as the 1727 Ocean Park Boulevard EC Early Childhood Education Facility expansion. And just lost the slide here. I think she is going to restart. And
Rachel, any chance you know what that appeal is that is coming to us?
I do not, unfortunately.
That's fine.
Well, Chair, I do have a little bit of background on that one. So that one is an appeal of a fence wall and hedge modification from the zoning administrator.
Well, without the slide, I can tell you that on February 14th, we'll be bringing forward the housing element red lines forward to City Council, and that will be preceded by the February 26th, that would be followed by the February 22nd study session again. And our hope is that there may be a final meeting on February 28th with adoption sometime in February for City Council. And Jing has put the slide back up. And for PC on March 1st, there is the amendment to the alcohol CUP for the Jordan Hotel, as well as a development review permit for the 516 Colorado Avenue Hotel project.
Great. Thank you very much. I don't think we have any questions at this point as well. Commissioner Landris, but
No. I'll go easy on everybody, but I know that that staff had hoped to train us in the use of the audio, in the use of the systems that we're going to have to know on March 1st. And I just wondered if dates I haven't gotten any emails about dates. So I just want to make sure that I protect that time and make sure I come in.
Right. And so if I may too, that is actually a discussion item, is the return to in-person meetings later on your agenda, as well as the rules of order. So perhaps you can discuss that in more detail at that time.
That's fine. It was staff administrative, like these are the dates you can come in to get trained, as opposed to let's discuss it. That's what I was asking here.
Well,
okay.
Let's wait until that item comes up. Thank you. And then Commissioner Fonda-Bernardi, I saw the hand up.
Yeah, this is an extension of the same question. On March 1st, will our starting time also be at 5:30, or will it be a different starting time?
So that is actually a question that's kind of before the commission this evening.
Got it. Okay.
As part of your discussion later.
It sounds like Jing might still have some audio issues, so I can go ahead and start the presentation for the item, and then hopefully she can join in if necessary. So okay. I will, if you want to call the item.
Yeah, I'll move along in the agenda. Okay, so we had director's report under 1A. We have nothing. Okay, announcements under 1B. Please note the procedures for public comment tonight. We are accepting real-time oral public comment by phone for each item. Please check the top of the posted agenda for the phone number to call once the caller queue for each item opens. The caller queue will open when each item is introduced and will close after the fifth public commenter has been heard. Written comments received up to noon today have been read by the commission. Comments received after 12 p.m. today will be considered part of the record of the proceedings, but may not be posted online with the Planning Commission agenda prior to the meeting. Second announcement, which I alluded to earlier, the moderated chat function at Blue Jeans is for technical help only from administrative staff. It is not for public comment. The commission cannot review the chat or see the comments, nor can they interact on the chat function themselves. Technical help only. Commissioners, do you have any announcements tonight? Yep. Seeing none, I'm going to note that there's nothing under agenda item 2, 3, 4, and 5. It will take us to 6A, which is the adoption of resolutions making recommendations to the City Council on the adoption of amendments to the land use and circulation element of the general plan, the Bergamot Area Plan, the Downtown Community Plan, the City of Santa Monica Comprehensive Zoning Ordinance, the Santa Monica Municipal Code chapters 9.01 to 9.52, with consistency for the sixth cycle housing element of the city's general plan. I will leave the long title there and ask staff to give us a presentation.
Okay. All right. So we are here tonight for the, hopefully, which is the final EC session for the housing element implementation programs of the first phase of implementation. We've been here for a while now, so hopefully, this will resolve a lot of the comments and issues that we have heard. Tonight's agenda will be focused on the changes that we have made since the last Planning Commission hearing. And so we'll focus on the changes made and then forward the recommended red lines to the City Council on implementing this first phase of the housing element. So the first thing that we heard from the January 18 PC hearing was that the inclusionary requirement of the downtown community plan of 20% was not feasible. So in reviewing that inclusionary requirement, we have made changes to address PC's concerns. Specifically, we changed that inclusionary percentage back down to 15%, based on recognition that there was, anecdotal evidence that there was rising construction costs as well as increased land costs. In addition, in recognition of PC's concern that the housing project definition in the downtown community plan was different with the remainder of the city, as well as the HAA definition of housing project, we made a slight clarification that if you're a project that is 25% non-residential, you'd still qualify for the streamline provisions. However, if you meet the HAA definition of no more than 33% non-residential floor area, you still qualify for the higher heights in the FARs. And so we made that edit and clarification in the DCP. And in addition, in response to PC's direction, we clarified what projections are allowed in the daylight plane. So we made some added clarification to state that projections are permitted in the daylight plane. And in addition, there was discussion about the transparency requirement and for the mixed use zones in straight facing facades. There was discussion that we should change it down to 50% instead of the 70% that is currently required. So that change was made in section 9.11.030 of the zoning ordinance. In addition, for consistency purposes, we also made that change in the downtown community plan section, reducing that percentage transparency requirement to 50%. And we also deleted the 65% visual transparency requirement, which addresses kind of the opacity of glass materials. And so we just deleted that for flexibility. In addition, following PC's direction, we deleted the references to Tier 1 and state density bonus application. That actually was a mistake, and so that was deleted. In addition, we also increased the flexibility for moderate income housing projects within the overlay to have up to 33% market rate units, in addition to non-residential units. So basically, this would mean that if a 100% affordable moderate housing project came in, they would be allowed to have up to 33% of market rate units and or non-residential uses. And it gives flexibility for these housing projects to perhaps include market rate units to support them. In addition, we addressed parking concerns, parking comments that were made by the Planning Commission. So we reduced the requirement of replacing existing parking. So if the existing use is retained for a housing project, we would require 75% of the existing parking to be retained or replaced. We actually changed that to 50% following, a review of this requirement. We changed it to 50%. In addition, we also changed the requirement for alterations, additions, and expansions of existing schools to require that if they are making any additions or expansions, that they will only be required to replace 50% of the existing parking. Note that since the red lines were issued, we received public comment to clarify that this includes alterations of outdoor play space. So in the red line, updated red lines, we have added the word alterations to address any kind of conversions of outdoor play space to parking to outdoor play space to make sure that only 50% of the existing parking will be replaced. In addition, PC made a comment that there was an edit that seemed to imply that there were parking maximums. We made an edit to make sure that the parking maximums would only apply if the use was subject to a minimum parking requirement. So that change was made in the zoning ordinance. Furthermore, there was discussion about increasing the administrative review for new landscaping. Currently, it's at 750 square feet. We increased it to 1,000 square feet in the zoning ordinance. With respect to the AHPP, there was discussion that we added a clause stating that structures of merit would be exempt from the AHPP requirement. So we added that in, provided that the deed restriction is recorded for the life of the project. And this ensures that the structure of merit isn't demolished, that they would have to be kept if they were to be exempt from the AHPP. And so this reference was added throughout Chapter 9.56, the landmarks ordinance as well. And with respect to applicability of impact fees for SB 9 projects, we received public comment that development impact fees for SB 9 projects should be waived, and that was the PC's direction. Consistent with the Planning Commission's direction, we modified the applicability of HPP affordable housing projects to address SB 9 projects to state that HPP will only apply if there was a construction of 2 or more units. In addition, the section was modified to waive development impact fees for SB 9 projects. This includes fee waivers for the Child Care Linkage Program, the TIF, as well as the Parks and Rec fee. In addition, we also received public comment today identifying some typographical errors. These errors are shown here, and we are fine with this error. This error talks about the reference to the definition of a housing project. So as shown in the first bullet here, we're fine with this edits. So this will be carried forward in the City Council red line package. In addition, there was a comment made about changing the title of parking table 9.28.060. With respect to that edit is, we modified the edit a bit to be more clear to state that projects that are within 1/2 mile of a major transit stop or within the R1 or OP1 zoning districts. And the purpose of this edit is to ensure that if we do have a single family project within the R1 or OP1 zoning district, that they would be subject to a parking requirement of 2 spaces per dwelling unit. And so that's what this edit does. In addition, there was a public comment stating the 55 years versus the 99 years for a deed restricted housing. And so just for clarification, the 99 years was to apply to city-funded affordable housing projects and not to affordable housing projects that may be, receiving financial assistance from other funding sources, including a market rate developer. So we had to kind of split up the 2 sections here and see. And so you'll see here that the red line changes. We split up that section into 2 sections, one that addresses city affordable housing projects and one that does not. So it would only be city affordable housing projects that would be subject to the 99-year deed restriction period. With respect to Bergamot Area Plan, we also found an inadvertent mistake and leaving out the exception at the bottom with regards to, at the bottom of the table, addressing open space requirements. And so for open space requirements, we've added this edit in here to state that on small parcels, if the minimum required size of the primary open space is larger than the minimum required open space percentage, then no primary open space needs to be provided. And as I mentioned before, we received public comment about whether or not if a school was to convert their existing parking space into let's say, playgrounds, whether or not the on-site parking requirement replacement would be applicable. We've made this edit here to show that that they would only be required to reduce it by 50% or replace it by 50%.
Could you put it into slideshow mode? That would maybe take away the, yeah.
Sorry, is it not in slideshow mode? No. Okay.
We're seeing pop-ups and stuff.
Oh.
Yeah.
You know, look, I might have to.
Can you hear me now, by the way?
Oh, there you are, Jim.
Hey, there.
Oh,
Okay,
sorry, I had to call on my phone.
Oh, okay. I will.
I think we were here.
I will
right?
share screen, and then if you want to take over, if I can.
Oh, that's much better. Thank you.
I'm sorry, I didn't realize it was not. Okay. Jing, would you like to take over with the areas where staff disagrees?
Sure. Okay. So this is, I don't think we'll spend a bunch of time kind of reviewing this as we've talked about it a lot, but as the commission is aware, staff has concerns regarding the Planning Commission's recommendations to not rezone the neighborhood commercial district for, I think, all the reasons we've talked about before. And, you know, we had reviewed the potential estimated timeline to amend the housing element if we did not rezone, and it would take us past that October 2023 deadline, and all of this, you know, effort would, you know, potentially result with, you know, no guarantee that HCD would accept the revised draft. And we are also not in agreement on further upzoning of a particular portion of the conservation creative sector zone in the Bergamot area plan. We have concerns that it kind of over-concentrates housing capacity in one of the what's considered lower opportunity area of the city. And then another area here, this is regarding the downtown administrative approval threshold. The Planning Commission's direction was to change the downtown AA threshold from a project size of 90,000 square feet to match the interim zoning ordinance threshold of 1 acre parcel size. And you can see what that edit would look like there. I do want to note that the Planning Commission's edits, because it is challenging to sort of match up all these red lines, we put it in attachment E just so it's clear and easier to see. And they are reflected in Exhibit A1 of each resolution where applicable. Staff is concerned with respect to this recommendation really because I guess we didn't view it as much as a policy issue, but it will be something, you know, that will be raised to the City Council to receive sort of policy direction on this. The last time that they took action on this issue, it was for determining, you know, when a development review permit would be required versus what was formerly a development agreement, and that's where the 90,000 square foot project threshold came from. We just did some further analysis just to further understand, you know, how many parcels in the downtown are actually over or under an acre, and there's actually 21 parcels that are 1 acre or more. None of them are on the SSI because most of them are either unlikely to redevelop or they already have you know, existing entitlements, you know, so they were not, you know, included on the SSI. It's, you know, therefore I think in looking at that analysis, it's not likely that the 1 acre threshold would capture downtown sites with a high probability of redevelopment. And, you know, as we were looking at establishing this threshold, the 90,000 square foot project threshold is, you know, when we did like, in terms of comparable size and, you know, why the 1 acre parcel size threshold was established for the remainder of the city, it seemed that within the downtown area, the 90,000 square foot project threshold, which equates to roughly three lots of, you know, 22,500 square foot parcel size, it would be comparable to what the 1 acre threshold behaves like for the remainder of the city. In terms of the ground floor frontages along commercial boulevards, the Commission's direction was to increase the depth for which ground floor could be lower or higher, and that was increased to 3 feet versus 18 inches. And you can see that red line, what that edit looks like there. The Commission also discussed like where corner parcels, where 2 commercial boulevards intersect, the standard only applies to 1 frontage at the applicant's discretion. Staff was, concerned about this recommendation. This one, I think, as we discussed before, is really about, how the buildings address the street and limiting that dimensional difference to 18 inches. It provides the flexibility to ensure that the ground floor, has relationship to the sidewalk, and it promotes that active relationship between the buildings that define the public realm. And so we're just concerned that increasing it to a depth of 3 feet would impede that pedestrian orientation we're trying to encourage, where buildings need the sidewalk. And, the 18-inch depth didn't sort of come from nowhere. It was actually selected because it's the limit that a grab bar would be required. And we also did want to note that there is somewhat limited applicability to this. The commercial boulevards, they're not every single one in the city. It's the ones that are designated in the loose, and that's a definition that's added in the zoning code. Now, you can see there it's, Wilshire, Santa Monica, Broadway, Colorado, Olympic Pico, Ocean Park, and Lincoln, sort of the green lines that you see there. And, where we have this situation, I think that sort of, spurred this comment, in terms of corners. It's really where those boulevards intersect with Lincoln Boulevard. So it may be, some limited applicability. And then, I guess related to that one, there was public comment made to request that the pedestrian-oriented design standards be added to the list of possible waivers that an applicant could request in the zoning ordinance. And we thought that made sense because that standard did live in the active commercial design standards before. So it is something that applicants can request now. So you can see here, this is a change in response to the public comment that staff is supportive of, and we would add a number 6 to the list of the potential waivers that could be requested in the zoning ordinance. And then finally, there was a new policy discussion that hadn't previously been raised about the replacement of existing artist live workspace in new projects in the Bergamot area. Staff was concerned about this. We did not agree with it because, we were concerned that requiring the replacement of existing artist live workspace would likely be considered a new barrier to housing production, which is something that we had not previously proposed or analyzed in the housing element. We did also want to note that artist live work units, they're not residential uses, they're actually considered commercial uses. It's really intended to be commercial spaces with ancillary residential use, and we think that there may be other strategies to explore at a later date, to encourage or preserve artists with live work housing instead of sort of a wholesale replacement. Housing production. So with that, that brings us to the end of the presentation. That staff would recommend that the Commission adopt the 5 resolutions attached to your staff report that recommend that the City Council amend the loose, the zoning ordinance, the downtown community plan, the Bergamot area plan, and the general plan land use map and the zoning map for with the 6-cycle housing element. And we're happy to take your questions.
Great. Commissioners, I know we have questions, but I would also like to hear from the public before we go to have too many questions. But if it's an urgent question, let's go ahead with it, Sean.
Yes, it's just I actually agree that I'd rather hear from the public before we get into substantive questions. But there is a procedural matter that I just want to clarify before we get into it. We have obviously places where we agree and where we disagree. And when we sent the housing element up, it was our recommendations that went before as the recommendations to council. And then when there were issues that staff disagreed, staff had amendments prepared for council to vote on. Can you confirm that that's how these are going to move forward? I know we've had letters from the public about this, but it's something that's been on my mind.
Rest assured, the commission's recommendation is being fully presented. That's why we took the time to prepare the red lines where we could. I don't think that there's an area where we couldn't. I think the only one is the artist live work, because it sort of was more, it was a little vague, like more of a policy thing, as opposed to, we could pinpoint a section in the code. So absolutely, the commission's recommendation is being completely presented to the city council.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Okay, with that, we'd like to open the public comment period. There's a number at the top of the agenda for people to call in. So we'll give a few minutes for people to get into the queue, and staff, let us know if we have anybody in the queue at this point.
We do. I can begin to welcome them in.
Great, thank you.
Last four digits, 6155. You are now in the meeting, and you will have 3 minutes for your comment. If you could please state your full name and then go ahead with your comment.
Good evening, Commission. This is Dave Rand with Rand, Pastor, and Nelson. Can you hear me?
We hear you, sir.
Terrific. Thank you. A couple of points I'd like to make tonight. Two points and a technical clarification. First, I want to thank staff and the Commission for heeding some of the concerns that were heard at the last few meetings about the viability and feasibility of downtown housing projects with the new collapsed Tier 1 at 20% affordable and the reduction to 15% affordable, consistent with the balance of the city. I think it's a very helpful and important change. I can tell you in real time, it's potentially changing housing provider decisions about whether to go forward on land purchases. Given the effects of interest rates, construction costs, the macroeconomic world that we're living in, and Measure GS, which is proving to have a significant effect on the economic viability of these mixed income projects, this is a really critical change, and I encourage you to embrace it, as I suspect you will tonight. Second, I see the respective camps on the DCP administrative approval threshold. I know the Commission's been clear, staff has been clear. I guess I'd only add to this that the discussion about how there are just a few parcels downtown that are 1 acre and that they're not on the SSI and they're not likely to turn over, I don't really think that's the key point. I think the key point is that the 90,000 square foot threshold is too restrictive and will serve as an impediment to housing production. And I know that because I'm talking to developers who are stopping at 3 parcel assemblages, who could possibly pick up another parcel and do more housing, but are not because of this new threshold. And it's unfortunate, and I hope the council resolves the discrepancy and embraces the 1 acre threshold, because when they originally imposed that, it was only to capture the unusual mega project that needed more fulsome review, particularly CEQA review in that case. It wasn't intended to be a threshold that was going to pick up more projects than not. It was the very aberrant and unusual project. Lastly, a technical clarification. It should be made clear, if the 90,000 square foot threshold is to proceed, that the density bonus law, specifically Government Code 65915, F5, and J1, are very clear that the 90,000 square feet is to be assessed only on the pre-density bonus, pre-incentive project. Meaning, if you get a density bonus or you take an incentive concession for additional square footage over 90,000 square feet, that density bonus or incentive is not to trigger any other discretionary approval. The state law is very clear about that. So I would request a technical clarification that when we're talking about a 90,000 square feet threshold, it only means pre-density bonus, pre-incentive concession square footage, i.e. no additional FAR requested through the state density bonus law. Thank you very much. Appreciate all your hard work, and glad that this is looking to go on to the next step to City Council.
Okay, let me just make sure there's no questions for you, sir. I do not see any hands raised, so we'll thank you for your comments tonight and all the other nights, and we will Go on to the next caller.
Last four digits, 5621. You are now in the meeting and you will have 3 minutes for your comment. If you could please state your full name.
Good evening. This is Kevin Kozel with Harding Armor, 26th Street. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Great, thank you. I think I'll be very brief tonight. I was going to make I did submit a letter and I did express concern. I was concerned that the Planning Commission's recommendations were not going to be fully presented to the City Council given the red lines that were attached. But I heard Planning Manager Jing Yo just say now in response to Commissioner Landris that the Commission's recommendations will be presented to the City Council. And then, of course, obviously, staff will have the opportunity to explain its concerns where staff disagrees. So with that, I don't think I need to comment further, but I do want to thank the Commission and staff for all your time and hard work in moving this forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Not seeing any questions for you, so we appreciate your comments, and we'll move on to the next caller.
Last four digits, 1463. You are now in the meeting and you will have 3 minutes for your comment. You could please state your full name.
Hi, this is Paul Larmer with Harding Larmer, Kutcher & Kozel. I appreciate both the Commission and staff's hard work in getting to this point, as a lot of progress has been made, especially with respect to the code getting closer into compliance with state density bonus law. A few of the items that I had raised earlier in my communication had been addressed in the staff report, so I just wanted to raise a few that weren't. First, and I know this may seem minor, but I think, again, it's important to reflect what the Commission's recommendation is so that everything is documented properly. I wanted to ask the Commission to add a sentence in your resolution recommending the zoning ordinance changes to be clear that you are not intending to undo any of the important amendments in the economic recovery ordinance adopted. It's Ordinance 2726. It's just a timing issue where the base for your red lines was prepared before that ordinance was adopted. So those changes haven't been incorporated. And I think staff has already committed to make those changes and ensure that it isn't going to happen before council. But again, because the red lines currently don't reflect changes that were already made in law a couple months ago, it would be very helpful to add a sentence acknowledging that inconsistency and the intention of your recommendations in your resolution, and I included a sentence in my written correspondence for your consideration. Other items of substance in the zoning ordinance red line that you may have discussed last week, but again, I just wanted to bring up for your consideration are to exempt all multiple unit dwellings in non-residential districts from minimum parking requirements. The parking requirements, especially for those areas outside of the transit area, are extremely outdated and burdensome, and they may serve as a significant disincentive for applicants to add housing units or maximize the addition of housing units in their projects, and projects that don't meet the city's definition of housing project. Also, just a very minor note is when Rachel brought that slide up on the screen about that edit to the table title, I think that edit is actually in the wrong column, and I think it needs to be moved over to the left column. I also remain concerned about the 22.5% on-site inclusionary requirement for Tier 2 and above projects outside of downtown, and the 20 to 25% on-site inclusionary requirement for downtown Tier 2 and Tier 3 projects, as these will serve as a disincentive to applicants adding housing units or maximizing the addition of housing units. We continue to object to the maximum building footprint requirement as it makes projects much less efficient and significantly more expensive to construct. And I appreciate the change made to the density bonus law implementation about you can apply the density bonus law to whatever tier you're applying for a project that meets the housing development definition in state density bonus law, but not the housing project definition in this city. I'm not 100% sure that it is consistent with the state law, but I understand that it's complicated to apply them in tiered structure, and we are still considering this language. Thank you.
We do have a question for you, Commissioner Landris.
Thank you, Ms. Larmore. I just wanted to, I just got to acknowledge your letter, like you're having a good night from staff as far as staff is concerned. So thank you and staff for saving us a bunch of time. Could you expand on your comment about the maximum building footprint requirement? Because this has I don't think we've revisited this recently, and I would like to hear a little bit more about it.
Sure. You all have a maximum building footprint standard, which applies even to the podium level. And I think what has been suggested by other architects is that maybe you apply it above the podium level, so then you can still have breaking of massing above the ground level, but allow for, full floor plate uses on the ground level, such as grocery stores or other similar uses that you may want to add.
Great.
Does that address your question?
I mean, that's what I thought it was, because I had remembered it was another Hank Koenig suggestion. And I remember that having come in, but I wanted to make sure we were speaking about the right thing. My second question goes back to the pedestrian-oriented design standards. Would you expect, and I'm forgive me if I am mixing things here, but staff has a disagreement with the commission about the 3 feet. But because we're now applying it only to one side of the project at the applicant's discretion, there is a great deal more flexibility than there was previously under our proposal. Does the combination of that plus a waiver of the pedestrian-oriented design standards get us closer where we need to be?
First, I want to make sure my understanding is its proposal is the 18 inches, and it would apply on both commercial boulevards.
No, they're willing to go with us on board. No, if it's a corner lot, they're willing to go with us to the one side or the other. They just don't want it to be 3 feet, if I'm understanding correctly.
I would ask them to show you that red line. You may be correct, but I did not see that change in the red line. I only saw that change in the document where it said what your proposal was. I didn't see that in the staff red line. Just the point, because I do think that potentially matters. But again, regardless of what the standard is, I just think you can't account for every single site, right? I mean, it just depends on the length of the site, whether you can keep the ground floor, which, in many cases you may want to keep level on the private property side. And so depending on how long the site is, depends on whether you can comply with either the 18 inches or the 3 feet, and what's the degree of the slope. So I do think whatever the standard is, you still need to have that waiver option. And again, that's a waiver where you're applying and you have to meet certain findings.
Right. Okay. Yeah. I'm just looking for a compromise here. Just trying to take things off the table. Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for your comments tonight. We'll move on to the next caller.
Last 4 digits, 3267. You're now in the meeting, and you will have 3 minutes for your comment. If you could please state your full name and then proceed.
Yes. Hello, Commissioners. This is Jason Perry. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we hear you, sir.
Great. Yeah, I'm just, again, calling in as a trustee at New Road School, following up on the ideas that we put forth at your last meeting. And I want to thank the commission and staff for the attention that you all gave to our ideas, both at the meeting and since then in the changes to the parking requirements as they relate to schools. These changes would be very meaningful to our school, and I imagine other schools as well. And as you heard from staff, they're putting forth a slight change to the language to include alterations, and from our perspective, that should make clear that would cover changes to outdoor space for the addition of play areas or some other gathering space or landscaped areas on a campus. So thank you for your work on this. It's much appreciated.
You're welcome, sir. We appreciate the heads up on that issue. I do not see any questions for you tonight, so we'll thank you for your time. I'll move on to the next commenter.
Thank you.
Last four digits, 5209. You're now in the meeting and you will have 3 minutes for your comment. If you could please state your full name and then proceed.
Good evening, Commissioners. It's Ken Kutcher from Harding, Larmer, Kutcher & Kozol. So we're trying to back you up with a bunch of lawyer talk here. I'd like to begin like others before me by expressing appreciation to the hard work by staff and the Planning Commission. It's definitely been a long journey, and I appreciate the fact that there's been receptivity to a number of past comments, and I think we have a much better document along the way. I wanted to spend my time this evening talking to a letter that I submitted regarding the inclusionary obligations, and in particular point out or reiterate the concern about the apparently ongoing feasibility study update that's being prepared with respect to inclusionary housing obligations. My concern is that that study should be well vetted once it's released, opportunity to have it peer reviewed, professionals to take a look at the pro formas, and the commission have a chance to hear those comments and weigh in. And I'm concerned that the commission not be closed out of those discussions if they're taken directly to council without commission input. Obviously, it's been a matter of significant concern to the development community and to commissioners in terms of evaluating what's happened in the past with respect to elevated inclusionary obligations, and would like to try to avoid that the next round. So that's really the nature of my comments, and happy to answer any questions if there are any. Thank you very much.
We have at least one question for you, Commissioner Landers.
Thanks. Mr. Kutcher, you alerted us to perhaps what might be just a little bit of inartful wording when it comes to copyright. And my reading of the intent of that is to absolve the city of having to return physical things that are sent in, right, back to the applicant. Do you have language that you might propose that suggests that the physical instantiation of the intellectual property becomes the property of the city, and that submission confers a unlimited use license to the city to make said IP publicly available for inspection?
Gosh, I hadn't thought about trying to draft language. I hope that is the intent. I could certainly, spend a little time doing that, but don't want to step on anybody's toes over there. The one alert that I will have in that regard is just the question of there's some concern about having plans that people can copy, and yet I know the city posts plans all the time, and I don't know the answer to that conflict. But I agree that if the intention language is, you physically submit things like your material samples or your plans, those plans will remain, and materials will remain in the city's files, and certainly have no qualms about that. It's really a question of sort of who owns the intellectual rights to those as opposed to who has the physical copies of them.
Exactly, which is why I asked. And I don't want us to get distracted by this, but it strikes me that as a non-lawyer who has dealt with this at some level, it is now very straightforward to tell people, this is yours to look at. You may look at it. You may use it for the purposes of, commenting on it, evaluating it.
Discussion, analysis, yeah.
Right, but you may not, make money with it. You may not copy it and build your own version of the bill, of what it represents, right?
We're on the same page, absolutely.
Right. Notwithstanding that all of it will eventually drop into a chat GPT and eventually, we'll all be obsolete, lawyers, architects, and planning commissioners alike. But may I suggest that you provide some suggested language and maybe we can take care of this quickly.
Makes sense. Very good. And thank you for the question.
Okay. I don't see any other questions, so thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
There are no other callers in the queue.
Okay. Then it's up to us, commissioners. If we have questions for staff, now would be the appropriate time to start asking those questions. I see Commissioner Fonda Minardi with the first hand up.
Yeah, I have two clarification questions. We charge impact fees for ADUs.
Do we charge impact fees?
Yes.
No.
Okay. Second question is, the zone of the city that has, because of state law, has no minimum parking requirements, how does that interact with the Coastal Commission zone? Does it stop at the Coastal Commission zone, or does the Coastal Commission has lost its right to determine our parking?
With respect to AB 2097, it does not override the Coastal Commission's ability to, still request parking.
So half of our downtown has parking requirements, and presumably half doesn't. Is that where that means?
I mean, some of this. Right. I mean, I will say where we are today, because our LUP, our updated LUP, still wasn't certified. So I will say we did get as far when we reviewed the draft previously with the Coastal Commission in terms of, where the DCP had no minimum parking requirements. They were willing to, sort of go along with that, and bring that forward. But that process never completed. So where we're at right now is, yes, where you have a use in the downtown, it's sort of on a case-by-case basis, where a project is able to make that argument about no minimum parking. But you're right, absent sort of policy within an updated LUP, that speaks to no minimum parking or expanding it, consistent with AB 2097, the Coastal Commission would continue to have the opportunity to request parking within the coastal zone, independent of AB 2097.
Got it. Okay. My last clarification, there was a slide there where we were talking about the ability to add additional housing and or housing project next to behind an existing commercial use where there might be parking. And last time I thought we were talking about was that 75% of the parking had to remain. Then I thought something said that we were down to 50%. Was that a conflict between planning staff and planning commission? Or what was that? That slide just came up, but I didn't catch the meaning.
Yeah. So the commission's discussion was this was the one where if the existing use is retained for a housing project, require 75% of the existing parking supply to be retained or replaced. And then I'll just share my screen here so it's just maybe clearer. And then the commission, directed this alternative, the requirement can be reduced to less than 75% of the parking study is prepared. Staff was just coming up with an alternative to that because we have a provisions in the code right now that allow reduction of parking. It does take time and expense to the applicant to prepare that parking study. It really adds time and cost to the process, and there's not sort of uniformity to it, if you will. So staff is kind of proposing an alternative here of just reducing the requirement to, retaining 50% of the parking instead, just to make it simpler, as opposed to, having parking studies and, the time and expense of having to go through the review of them and what have you. We were trying to think of just something that was much easier to implement.
Okay. But as of right now, it stands at 75% with the staff recommendation.
No. The red line states 50% at the moment.
That's it for my questions.
I'm sorry, I was muted. Commissioner Landers, go ahead.
Oh, great. Thanks. Again, thank you, staff, for all your hard work on this. I'm appreciative. I'm also appreciative of your trying to find common ground. So I'm going to try to keep my questions to the bare minimum I can. When it comes to the pedestrian standards, if we were to keep the 18 inches the way you want us to keep the 18 inches, and I think you make a case for it, could you live with it on the corners attaching to one side or the other? I'd really like to avoid, what we went through with the projects back in 2018, and I think it would help.
Yeah, I think that when we looked at this issue, there are only 6 instances where these commercial boulevards intersect, or 7 maybe, and you can see here, it's all where it crosses Lincoln Boulevard.
Okay.
And we just thought it, in the grand scheme of the entire city, of 7 corners, it didn't seem like it was something that, why are we, choosing one boulevard over another, I guess. It sort of seemed odd given the very, very limited number of instances, where we would see, these requirements intersect at a corner, I guess, and I think that's where we were coming from, in terms of whether it made sense for, for the applicant to select whichever corner, this standard applies to, because these are also highly visible corners, arguably in the city, and whether it made sense to sort of offer that level of discretion. I believe we also, and I'll just confirm, within the code there is a process for an applicant to apply, to elect, which corner is their front or side or what have you. I think that's different than the question here. This is really about, like, when do these requirements apply?
And with that,
given again the limited number of times it would come up, you can see in the image down here.
Okay. And with that waiver, would that waiver send them to the commission, or could that be something the planning director could address?
It is. Let me see. Double checking if there's a modification or waiver. I'm not remembering off the top of my head right now. If it is a request that's part of a project that is otherwise going to the Planning Commission, it has to go to the Planning Commission.
Right, but I'm thinking
that's the way the code is written. Yeah, if it's just a request all on its own, then it could be. It doesn't have to go to the Planning Commission.
I mean, I guess it would be helpful if there were a way to get to the, I mean, you see where we're going, to get to the flexibility such that it doesn't pull an AA off an AA, right? That this could get resolved with appropriate findings at the administrative level. I think
in that case it would be, so right now in the code it's a major modification to switch your front to your side, so to speak. and that's normally done at the zoning administrator level. If you wanted it to apply and not sort of, have that as an extra step in an AA, it would need to become a minor modification.
Great. Okay, so now I have some homework. All right, I'll put that on my list. And my second question is, could you comment on the maximum building footprint issue? What would be the barrier to applying the maximum building footprint above the podium?
So the commission actually, I think, decided or voted on, straw polled on this issue before. The maximum building footprint is, I believe it's like 35,000 square feet, which is a pretty big footprint. We did not see any reason why, it would need to be waived or modified or what have you, because that's again a pretty big footprint, and the commission has had this discussion and made no change to it. It was basically the footprint that applied to Tier 2 projects, and we made it the standard. So it's actually bigger than what you could have now as a Tier 1 project. So, we would be concerned with having, I think the issue was, being able to kind of break up the mass, if you will, with what is a pretty big footprint across what, potentially larger sites as opposed to something covering an entire site, and having like individual masses on top. I think that was our concern, was just having, complete site coverage over a very large parcel, if that standard wasn't there. And again, we thought 35,000 square foot footprint is a pretty big footprint.
And that that is literally built up. In other words, if there's fully enclosed open space in that footprint, that doesn't count as footprint, correct?
Yeah, I mean, if you think about a definition of footprint, it's like if you pancake a building, and
sure.
you look at it from up top, that's probably the best way I can explain it. Yeah.
Okay. All right. That's helpful. I mean, some of us may have, some people have read and maybe dreaming about the idea of being able to live over a Costco. There's a project coming in, I think, somewhere in LA where they're literally building 800, I think it's like 800 units of housing on top of a Costco. I can imagine maybe one site in Santa Monica where that might even be remotely feasible. So I'm not going to push this further. I'm good with questions for now. Thanks.
Mr. Fresco.
Hi, thank you. We're getting there. I had a couple of questions. So regarding the moderate housing overlay flexibility that we had discussed, my understanding was that what we wanted was to experiment by allowing 25% of the actual housing units in a moderate project to be market rate, in addition to the ground floor commercial they might have, in order to add to feasibility, because our land value in Santa Monica is so much higher than anywhere else in the universe where market rate deed restricted housing has been built. So basically, by allowing the 33% that could have been commercial to also be housing doesn't really do it, because commercial is actually, from what I understand, should be more profitable on the ground floor than housing. So that doesn't get us to where we want to go. And that's not what I understood we asked for either.
I mean, the commission voted on 33%. That's what is in the red lines is what the commission voted on. I can understand where there might be some differing, because there was a ton of discussion in the preceding that. I mean, I can guarantee we have it in our notes and the recording that is what the commission voted on. Certainly, if you wish to change your minds on that, we can do that. But that is actually what the commission voted on.
I'm quite certain it was 33% of the units and not 33% of the building. Because if this is a lateral move, it's not really a help. So we'll have to discuss that later. The other thing I wanted to know is why Bergamot, which is a completely commercial area, is considered low opportunity in your mind. I don't understand that.
That's based on the census tract that it's located in.
Right, but in actuality, there's not housing there, and the businesses there, there's a lot of, pretty high-end production companies and so forth. It's not. We would be creating a pretty high opportunity area. We wouldn't be impacting. It's going to be a lot of really expensive housing that goes in there. I just don't understand how that figures.
So it's based on HCD's maps of, they define high and highest and low opportunity and what have you. So, like I said, it's sort of by census tract. There's not a lot of services in that area. It takes into account things like school proficiency, environmental hazards, proximity to the freeway, all those factors, not just one singular thing. It's not just, whether there are housing units there or not. It's about sort of the existing environmental conditions.
So if we have a whole new area of our city that previously didn't welcome housing, so it didn't have all of those residential services, it defies logic that we would be discouraged from adding a new neighborhood, a brand new neighborhood of market rate housing with 20% inclusionary. Don't need to.
Well, we're not, in Bergamot, it's not that no housing is being added. There actually is a lot of housing potential being added. Our concern was, more going above and beyond, some already pretty significant upzoning in that area. That was our concern.
All right. And then regarding the artist live work idea, which I was a little perplexed why that was new, because that's also something we've talked about. And there is a whole program that in Program 1E does refer to artist housing. And my understanding was, which I admit to have kind of lost track of in the scheme of all of the things that we're doing, for those of us who do other things a lot of the time too, it's hard to. But my understanding was we were going to look at the fact that it is a commercial use and to try to rethink that a little so that it could be more incorporated into housing and not be a constraint, that it would be a particular type of unit, but it wouldn't be taking square footage and newly built area that's invested in and restraining it in some way. So I guess in Program 1E, where you do say something now, I don't have it in front of me, about artists live work housing in Bergamot, what does that mean if it's not this?
So what the program actually says is that the Bergamot Area Plan should also consider the special housing needs of artists, such as live work units, to promote artist residence in the Bergamot area. It does not say anything about replacing existing uses. So to the extent we're talking about code changes here, it's really a policy exploration, perhaps. It's certainly something they could look at future phases. It's just not something that we thought was appropriate, to require the replacement of existing artists live work units to the extent they exist, within projects, because of that concern of creating a new barrier housing production, which is our focus, in this implementation at the moment.
But originally, the Bergamot Plan required a certain percentage of the FAR to be artist live work. And we're taking that out, and we're taking out what marginal amount of artist space we have left in the city. And so I guess I really think it does need to be something in zoning and more concrete, and that we put it in there so we consider it, and now we've considered it and we're not doing it. Just doesn't seem adequate to me. But that's another thing we'll discuss with my colleagues. So those were my...
There's nothing, I'm not aware of a requirement. There's an incentive for like an art gallery. I think it's in the Bergamot Transit Village as a tier 3 project. You get additional building height and FAR for some like higher volume ground floor, and the intent at the time was thinking about art spaces or studio spaces on the ground floor, but there's not a development standard in the Bergamot Area Plan that requires the replacement of existing artist live work or, something of that nature. It was considering it in a development agreement context for a tier 3 project in the Bergamot Area Plan.
Well, now we have nothing. So then I wanted to go back to this idea that Ms. Larmore brought up and that Sean also asked about, but about the red lines that are attached to our resolution. I didn't actually look at those red lines. I just looked at the ones in the staff report, and I assumed that they were the same, and that the ones that are attached to the resolution have staff's recommendation. Is that right?
Actually, they have both. They have both staff and the commission's recommendation.
Can you show us that? Because I won't be able to find it. How is that? I guess, and while
why don't you maybe you could give us an example of like the downtown one where it's the 1 acre versus the 90,000. How is that drafted up?
So this is about kind of how we present information as clear as possible. So this is an example of the ECP resolution. We did not want, as we were drafting these red lines, because there's a lot of language here, and we didn't want things to get lost or to be confusing. So you can see here that the red lines here exhibit A, what's called Exhibit A to the resolutions, are the staff recommended amendments, and then Exhibit A1, if it's applicable, has the modification, which is the Planning Commission's recommendation. Because some of these are raising policy questions that are, at times maybe completely counter to prior council direction. In the case of the NC, it's just, not consistent with the housing element. It's a lot of work to sort of redo 2 sets of red lines, and we were trying to make it as clear as possible. Like, here's the base set, and here's how it's modified, by A1. So you sort of look at it together. And it's also easier tonight, like to the extent the commission has more recommendations, right, to add on, we could add it on to A1. This is really just, again, a way to make it really clear. Otherwise, drafting on the fly in the midst of these documents, can get confusing and messy. So we did it this way to, make it clear to everybody, this is the commission's recommendation, so it really reads clearly.
Okay, well, I think that's sufficient. It's, the other question I had about that was, at least in our staff report, in theory, it's a staff report to the Planning Commission. So you're talking to us so we know what we said, or at least we think we know. But, it says, like, if my big example is, of course, our position on neighborhood commercial. And you say the Planning Commission doesn't want to make changes to neighborhood commercial, but staff, and then there's like about 8 inches of reasons why staff doesn't want to do it. And when this goes to council, I think it's really important that the staff report reflect more of the record of the conversations that we had at Planning Commission and explain why Planning Commission doesn't want to change that, and then say why staff, whatever staff thinks they need to say in response. But, I just want it to be more balanced and be more of a record of what actually occurred during all of these lengthy conversations that we've had. Does that seem?
I don't think there's ever been an instance where we haven't represented the Planning Commission's position. So, of course, yes, that will be the case. And your letter to the City Council will be attached. I think just so you understand, as we go into the City Council, it will be study sessions at the City Council first. We're not jumping straight into adoption hearings with the Council. The Commission is raising, really quite a large philosophical question with respect to the NC, right? And I imagine it will be, subject of discussion, obviously, at the study session. And of course, the Commission's letter to the Council will be attached. They received it, it was sent to the Council. They're fully aware of the Commission's position, on this matter.
Right, but also for the public and just for the record, to balance, the fact that, we think this is a affirmatively fair housing move and, not to the contrary, and that's why we recommended it. So anyway, we will get more into that later too. Thank you, and I'm sorry to be such a crank, but gotta do what I gotta do.
Okay, I saw it. Commissioner Landers, you had your hand up.
Yeah, but I do have follow-up questions, but Commissioner Chair Reese, you haven't asked your questions yet. I don't think Commissioner Tolkien has either, so I'm happy to take my turn.
Commissioner Tolkien, do you have any questions you want to? You're muted, sir. You're still muted.
There we go.
There you go.
Oh.
I think you're ready to go if you have questions.
No, I don't right now.
Okay.
I thought you heard me.
No, we didn't hear you. You were muted. Okay.
So
I have I'm happy to say that most of my questions have been either asked by staff or responded to asked by my fellow commissioners, or staff dealt with beginning. I do want to ask staff to talk to us a little bit more about where we are with daylight plane, because I think Commissioner Lambert had an email about this, and there was a concern about what we're doing, and I think her position is we should not be allowing any incentives to encroach into that because it's an important thing to save, our solar on adjacent properties. So can you just recap where we're at with that discussion? Because I think as a commission, we've been pushing a little bit for, let's make sure that we can ask for a deviation through a density bonus.
Yeah.
Argument here that we have solar issues.
So I think first and foremost, Philly doesn't have, we don't have a solar access ordinance. The solar rights ordinance has to do with permitting, of course, with which the city is fully compliant with. It's the process to make permitting, for those things as smooth as possible. But with respect to the daylight plane, of course, had many discussions about this, and I think we were trying to implement what the commission had given us direction about on this issue, which was, I think initially the commission wanted to remove that as a standard completely. And staff didn't agree with that. We kind of wanted just to keep it, on the list of by right waivers. However, if there's discomfort about the daylight plan at the moment, certainly it could come off the by right menu of incentives and concessions. All that means is that the applicant would have to submit, the documentation in accordance with state density bonus law to request that as an incentive concession or waiver of reduction of development standards. I will say that, we are not aware of any mechanism to just blanket prohibit, an applicant from requesting an incentive or concession or waiver to a standard. These requests are reviewed, individually, right? So, certainly I guess if there was a project that requested that, we look at the request and, whether it meets the requirements of state density bonus law. They provided the appropriate documentation and assess it on a case-by-case basis. But I think, just to address the concern of, is this a waiver we must allow? I think the answer is, or, must we allow people to apply for this? I, believe the answer is yes. Again, we're not aware of any mechanism to just say that you can't, you're not allowed to request a waiver or incentive or concession from daylight plane. That's not something that the statute supports, I don't think.
Okay. So, I'm sorry, I had a little distraction here while you were just talking. I apologize for that. But basically, we do allow, we're allowing for it right now as a built-in waiver. But if we really have concern with this, you're saying, or we have it as an on-menu incentive. What you're saying is there's really a concern, then we should take it off there, and then somebody can just use the power of the density bonus and move and ask for that if they need it through a waiver.
Right. It would, just require them to submit the documentation to justify their request in accordance with state density bonus law.
Okay. Okay. And then can you talk a little bit about, I think it was Ms. Larimore talked about these economic recovery plan and the issue of an overlap or lack, that there might be a conflict between there. Can you opine on that a little bit and say, is that a concern for us, or are we addressing that some other way?
No, I don't believe there's a concern about it, and I'm certainly I could start and Heidi can jump in, but this has come up before. So they, as we've been going through this process since the end of 2023 or 2021, right? Is when we started going through these red lines, and so for consistency, we've been using the same set of base zoning ordinance, if you will. Obviously, since that time, we have had ordinances come into effect as permanent, but to not confuse anyone, what we presented to the commission by and large has been just red line changes, so amendments to the zoning ordinance, and it's not, critical, like, what the base document is. Obviously for council, that is being reconciled, through the city attorney's office to ensure that obviously we're using the correct base zoning ordinance, the most updated one, right, with all of our permanently in place zoning ordinance red lines, but we just felt like changing it midstream would be confusing to everybody, but we're not concerned that there's a conflict, and the planning commission's resolutions don't change the law. They're recommendations to the city council, really focusing on the amendments to the planning, to the zoning ordinance and the loose and the Bergman plan and DCP. They don't change, what the law that is in effect, or the base ordinance itself.
Okay. Okay. And then I see Commissioner Tolkien. Hold on just a second. Let me ask my last question, and I'll come back to you. Parking out, we've heard this about parking outside of the half-mile radius and how maybe some of those standards are 1970s or 80 standards. Do you have a concern about that, a recommendation on what to do there, or is that?
Honestly, that would be a completely new work effort. It's not been our focus with this phase of housing element implementation. It's really been implementing 2097, right, and focusing on supporting housing projects. I understand that the comment is really about parking standards in general. That is a far larger discussion, about outside of the half mile, that I think we can certainly delve into, at a later date. But,
you don't want to just revise that on the fly tonight? Okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure we'd be prepared to do that.
All right. Well, thank you for entertaining my current set of questions. Again, I will say I do appreciate all your work because a lot of things were answered in your presentation or in responses to commissioners. So, Commissioner Tolkien, you had a question. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I was very impressed, not totally in agreement with everything with Commissioner Lambert's letter to us. I was wondering if that could be included in the, whatever's presented to the city council in some way. Maybe with her approval, of course.
Oh, it's part of the public record.
Yes.
But they'd have to go search for that document. I'm not sure how. We should urge her to resubmit that as part of public comment to the council, so it's fresh in their comments.
Okay. That's what I'm suggesting.
Okay. Commissioners, I see Commissioner Landers. Go right ahead.
Thank you very much. I'll just, to Commissioner Tolkien's point, from a procedural standpoint, back when I was chair, we presented a draft of the housing element early on, and Chair, you'll be offered time at council to represent the Planning Commission if you want it, and you should take it. What I did with my time back in March of 2021 was to hand over half of it to Commissioner Fresco, who spoke extremely eloquently about the history of redlining and racial injustice in Santa Monica. I gave her most of my time, actually. And so something the commission could do, either by vote or simply by action of the chair, is designate, someone to speak. Perhaps it would be Leslie, Commissioner Lambert, to take some of that time up and convey the commission's feelings about neighborhood commercial. That would be something that could be handled within the procedure, within the commission's time at council. I think we have like 5 minutes. We're at the top of public comment is how or actually when Elisa presented on the item, she was part of the staff team. So when the final recommendation went in, Chair passed her. So just some options for you to consider. But I would like to blow up the NC question one last time with staff. And I want to go all the way back. So we have housing standards and commercial standards in, and then I want to come back on the live work thing, but maybe there's a workaround here. But this is more pressing. We have all kinds of things that are in our permanent zoning ordinance right now. What is it that we are sweetening overall to, in all districts, to encourage housing in addition to the heights, the FARs, and and sort of the density bonus fix? One thing we're doing, for example, is we're allowing ground floor residential everywhere in the city. What else? What other incentives are we offering?
For just housing production in general?
Housing production in general. We're reducing parking requirements. We're offering ground floor
parking requirements. I mean, obviously the most obvious is the increased development capacity, but there's also process. In terms of no public hearings, for code compliant projects. Flexibility on the ground floor is definitely one. Parking requirements, and then I think, we've relaxed some of these. We've looked at some of these key development standards through the process, as part of program 1F or 1J. I'm not remembering right now, but just looking at things that have been brought up through the process, and we've revisited all of those things. I think those are the major incentives or the big levers we have. Really in standards, process, and flexibility in mix of uses.
So where I'm going with my question is, I understand that we've made a commitment to upzone that. There's only really one path to not do that, right? That's the request for an amendment, and I respect that, and I'm in an agreement with Commissioner Lambert that I would respect. I would reluctantly vote to move forward with the staff's recommendation, in order to avoid non-compliance with the housing element. My question is, are there things that are currently permanently in place in the NC that were in place before January 1st, 2018 that we could simply maintain, and that we could simply say, look, we're going to apply it everywhere except the NC. And maybe we'll take more time and we'll take another look. But in the meantime, to avoid the essentially wholesale destruction of our commercial districts, which is unlikely to happen overnight, but over time we could see substantial transformation. We as a city have an interest in retaining commercial activity in our commercial districts, and particularly our neighborhood commercial activity in our neighborhood commercial districts, alongside with the development of housing. So I'm just wondering, what might we take off the menu in the NC without violating our promises to HCD?
Well, I think what existed and, will continue to be in the NC is, we are still requiring ground floor commercial. There's flexibility everywhere else, but on main streets and on Fontana Avenue, and I don't recall, I have to check with the team, is it all the NC zones? But I remember at least Maine and Montana, those areas had to be, you're still required to have the ground floor active use. So, you don't have the flexibility to only have housing on the ground floor, unlike the rest of the boulevards. There's also a restriction on parcel consolidation in the NC, and it's a maximum of up to 15,000 square feet, and that is not going away either. So this sense of an entire block long consolidation is not something that would be allowed in the proposed red lines.
And what about, did we ever actually do anything with the street frontage requirements? I mean, did any of the Pico Wellbeing Project move forward in bits and pieces?
No, it was a land use piece. I think it was really, none of it really did, but I think what came out of it was the food hall definition primarily. Only
the food hall definition. Because I think, looking at some of those frontage rules could also be helpful, because we had a lot of conversations about those and the permitted uses. But what about,
yeah, so, sorry to interrupt, but I think to the extent that it requires the ground floor active use, the active commercial design standards do apply in terms of, transparency and sort of, a minimum percentage amount of, the ground floor facade, being transparent, right, and being supporting street activity. So, if you require the ground floor active use, then those active design standards still kick in.
Right.
That were intended to get us sort of that fine grain, retail.
Okay. And then would we, could we make sure that the ground floor uses are retained on Pico and Ocean Park in the NC?
I mean, if you wanted to expand that, sure. I mean, it's, do you mean that you want to require ground floor active uses in all of the NC zones?
Yeah.
As opposed to just Maine and Montana? Yeah.
Correct. I mean, ironically, from a fair housing, affordable housing access to, reading the HCD's definition of affordable housing and fair housing and furthering fair housing, the access concerns that they have without trying to preserve any individual business, it's clear that our concern for legacy businesses serving communities that are traditionally disadvantaged or have been redlined is not an unreasonable thing to do. So to the extent that we can maintain the requirement that, businesses of that size and, land use size have to be present, we would certainly be preserving our neighborhood commercial in the most vulnerable areas. I think that could be a potential workaround for us while we try to sort of get, kind of work our way through this.
So, yeah, I'm just checking our code right now. So Main Street and Montana are called out specifically in our code right now to require active use on the ground floor. It does not name any other NC district like Pico, Ocean Park, or anywhere else. So that would be a brand new requirement. It doesn't include Pico as well. The only like 2 neighborhood commercial districts are Maine and Montana, where the active use requirement is in place in our current zoning ordinance.
Okay, I'll bring that back in discussion.
We'd have to.
Let's.
Yeah, I'm only raising. We'd have to give that a quick think because it could be considered a new constraint on housing because it's a brand new standard that doesn't exist right now.
But we're extending ground floor residential throughout the city. So if we're extending it and, putting it out in a bunch of places and kind of not constraining it, but kind of clarifying our intent on NC, then that's a net increase. So, and that's a net fulfillment of the promise. So I would, let's save that for discussion. I want to come back on live work because I did a deep dive into the zoning code. I see that the zoning code defines live work as a non-residential use, and it further, although in the actual detailed description of live work, it doesn't say it's non-residential or even that it's incidentally residential. Only place where the word incidentally residential appears is in the definition that I am searching for one more time. It says it's a workspace with incidental residential use. This is in 9.51.030. Technically, what you're really describing is work live, not live work. I would be inclined to try to find a way to, for the purpose in the Bergamot area, and I'm wondering if we can do this, to simply say that within the Bergamot area, live work is redefined as a residential use and must be replaced. End of story. And we could even clarify that the unit has to be a living unit with incidental but sufficient workspace. If that clarification needs to be made in the code, but based on what you're saying, I don't see any bar to us literally naming it as a residential use in the Bergamot area for the purpose of preserving housing units that are there now, even if they are even if they are in the code nominally incidental to the work that's taking place. Is there a reason we couldn't do that?
I would strongly not recommend we just do this on the fly. There are, just having been through this on completely separate, it was a code compliance matter, but the definition of live work overlaps a lot into the building code, actually. And I just don't think that we can just suddenly call it a residential use because it's not considered that within the building code. When we talk about live work, and the history of this is that the city did have something called artist studios in the past. That was like the 50-50 situation. We ended up with basically luxury lofts that had no artists in it, actually. And it's, how do you define a live work space, that is all residential? I mean, I'm not quite sure we can on the fly figure out all of the potential ramifications of doing this, of calling it a residential use, and how that's defined, because that was always the challenge. Does someone put, a piece of tape down the middle of their unit and be like, that's my live side and that's my work side? Like, it was, it was extremely, extremely hard to enforce and implement. And I have to say, I would strongly recommend we not do this on the fly.
Okay.
We can certainly do it at a later phase when we have more time to explore all these issues, but I'm not sure it's necessary right at this moment.
Okay, I hear you, and I don't want to accidentally make a big mistake here, but I do want to, last question, I promise. What anti-displacement protections currently exist for people who are living in live-work units? are they protected under SB 330 or under other, iterations of, or SB 8 or other iterations of the Housing Accountability Act? Do they have any protection, and can we give them any? At the very least. Because I don't want to,
We would have to look into that question. I don't know. We'd have to look at the state law and how they define a unit or a protected unit, because it certainly could be broader than how we do it at the local level.
Okay.
How we define, a renter or a tenant. So I'm just don't know that answer right now.
I would love to find a way. Yeah, I mean, what I'd love to do is flag this for the council and say would there be a way, and maybe there may be some other issues that other people want to raise, but would there be a way for us in our resolution, we forward you the resolution that we're done with, but we put a pin on it, but we also say, please, planning team, flag these issues for council because you're going to take another 3 weeks on it. We're worried about these pieces. We don't want it to get in the way of our compliance, but we do want you to be aware of them. And for you to just include it as like a sentence or two in your report to the council.
I mean, that's fine. I think that there are things that, necessarily, we can't do everything all at once, right? Our focus here largely on these programs has been housing production. I think with respect to this live work issue, it would really help us to understand where we are seeing this concern. I'm not genuinely not aware of this being an issue. We have data points to draw from. It just helps to inform us. I think if there's something that's driving this concern, like if we're seeing wholesale removal of something, where that's happening, I think that would just be helpful just to understand, the scale of the issue that we're trying to address. But, I think this is one that is, going to be a later phase and, and as we've identified in the Planning Commission reports and we would intend to at the council, these programs are the ones that we promised that we said we would do, are the most important to get out there to implement our housing element. And it doesn't mean that there's not another phase of this, to take on, where we can get into these other issues. But, it's sort of we're in the must-dos right now versus things that, we might be able to take on at a later date.
I'll stop here, but what I will say is my worry is that the minute we enshrine something as permanent, we can't walk it back. So we don't want to do something that we can't undo later without triggering a response. And that's why you're seeing people like Leslie and me and Nina and others get a little worried that because of that no give backs in a way that we don't want to give until we, are sure that we're giving the right amount and the right scale. I'm going to stop here with great appreciation. So thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Fresco.
I have kind of a process question here about time. When we had the original draft of the housing element, this whole part of implementation was going to be 6 months later than it is now. We actually moved it forward kind of at the last minute. And now, we're hurrying, but we're still 8 months out. So why can't we take another few weeks and just look at these last few things and get them right and then send it to council, or even, you see what I'm saying? I mean, we have until October 15th and it's only February, barely February. So we have, 8.5 months. Why don't we take some time and look at some of these things?
And Nina, do you have any fear that in our next meeting, when we talk about these things, that we're not going to come up with 4 or 5 other things that extend this out?
No, I don't think these things are all new, actually. I think these are all things that we've brought up and we've been going at warp speed, and I know staff can barely keep up and they're working on it full time and there's a whole team of them. And then we as individuals who have whole other lives going on too, and it's not our full-time job. It's just
It's a huge effort.
Yeah, I'm just frustrated that I feel like we're bringing up really important things and we're rambling, and I feel like, I listened to our recording from a year ago, February, when I personally brought up almost all of these things, and including neighborhood commercial, and that was when we had our asterisk zoning commitment in our failed housing element that we didn't know was rejected yet. And this was the plan, and this was always the intention with, the best of intentions to meet our housing goals. And I just feel like somehow, I don't know, maybe I don't speak loudly enough. I'm not feeling heard and I'm very frustrated and I'm being rushed, and these are important things. They're, if we may not have quantitative data in City Hall about the artists in Bergamot, but if you go there and you walk around, you'll see them. They're there. It's concrete. I've talked to many of them, and it's a thing. And we have a whole artist plan.
Okay.
We have lots of documents about this, and even in the city, that were created in 1990s, the first time these artist spaces were proposed for demolition. So now they're going to go away, and we should think about the fact that our city is losing its artist communities. And this is not a new idea.
Nope. And this goes on all over the place. Wherever artists are, they go to cheap places where the land is cheap and they can get big spaces, and then they become cool, and then
right. But Santa Monica is never going to have another artist because we don't have any cheap spaces left.
Yep, and that's what they're saying about the arts district in downtown too. So it's not just Santa Monica. We have this all over. This is a big issue all over. So that would be something, a motion that you would make, I guess, when we start getting to the motions. But I think at this point, it's best to discuss any other items and then get to those motions. So does anybody else have, I think we're closing the public. I don't see any more questions. I'm going to close the public hearing or public comments, and we're going to have our discussion. So anybody want to kick this off? Commissioner Landers?
Sure. For the sake of moving us forward, let me ask, is there a willingness to start building a motion, or do we need to have extensive discussion before I make a motion?
I think
I would like to make some I'd like to pose some amendments, I'll do this. I think the pedestrian depth issue that we discussed, I'd like to move that it be made a minor modification rather than a major one in order to minimize the impact of making a change. And I'd like to move that with the chair, if you don't mind, to remove the daylight plane from the on menu waiver list.
Right.
And those are the two things that I like to move. Okay.
Okay, I agree with those as well. I think we have a baseline question first, because Nina's asking us if we're interested in continuing this discussion for another couple of weeks.
Well, I'm not asking that now. First, what we need to do is talk a little bit more about moderate housing and artist live work and neighborhood commercial, which are the three things, I feel like I want to hear.
Okay, so you don't want to go right. You don't want to go right now to that motion. So then let's go with, there's a motion on the table.
We could straw poll on the motion. I'm just trying to clear the decks of the stuff that we're all agreed on, if we are.
Okay. Let's do it. So we have a first and a second on those two items for a straw poll. We should take a vote.
Commissioner Fondo Bernardi,
Yes.
Commissioner Fresco,
Yes.
Commissioner Landris,
Yes.
Commissioner Tolkien,
Yes.
and Chair Reese.
Yes.
And I apologize. I had one last clarification question, which I will put in the form of a discussion question. But if staff wants to weigh in on this, the alteration of uses that was proposed and that staff proposed following the comment from the public that came from a school, I wasn't clear whether that was limited to the Bergamot area, A, or whether it was citywide, and B, why we would limit that particular alteration to schools only when there are other community assembly uses for which the same kind of nonprofit youth benefit transformation might equitably apply. And so I was just wondering about that.
All right. So
I think
that's
we were trying to
Let's
respond to
open
a
the
public
comment
comment.
again. Open the public comment and let Jean respond.
Okay.
Sorry.
So we
go
were
ahead.
just responding to the, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. This came about because of a public comment received at your January 18th meeting, and we were just responding to the commission's direction to include it. And then there was further public comment about outdoor spaces. So we felt, adding alterations helped to sort of like broaden and maybe clarify that, if those outdoor spaces would apply. That's really why, because this was brought up in the context of school, we did not see any comments about it.
Yes. So I think that's it, Sean, is it was really focused on the school. Now the question is, was it citywide? I didn't quite hear that answer, but it was really focused at schools.
Yeah, it is citywide. I don't think it's just
It is citywide. Okay. And is there a reason to, in other words, to take it up a level, so, and also this is trying to just keep it from a kind of zoning, though it's not really because it's applying to schools. There are other institutions that serve youth that could want to turn a parking lot into an outdoor space. And the way we're writing this now, if they're not a school, they can't do it. But if they're I'm just asking that out loud. If we don't want to go there, we don't have to, but I just didn't want to leave it unclarified.
Well, it seems like it would be up to the commission to want to expand that to things other than school. And I think this is the first time we're hearing it. So it's not a great time to bring up new items, but I guess that's our struggle part of our struggle.
It's new to us now because we got the letter and staff made this shift. So I'm just asking if the scope of the shift is appropriate. That's all. I can go either way on this one, but I just wanted to name it because we have like boys and girls clubs and youth groups and, churches, all of which the congregations, I kind of want to push them to build the housing. So I'm not eager to give them an off ramp, but some of the others.
Well, there's a lot of attorneys listening into this conversation right now who represent these individuals, and if they see that as a potential benefit to their clients, I bet you between now and council they will start lobbying for that.
Can we just look at that language on the screen, or tell me what page it's on my red lines? I just want to look at it again and see what it is.
Has the agenda, the PowerPoint been posted to the public page yet?
Yeah, it was posted before the meeting. Yeah.
Okay. Great.
So it's section 9.28030 A1B, and I can get you a page number just in a moment.
Thank you.
Yeah, and if it can be put up on the screen, that would be ideal.
Sure. Oh, okay. Maybe I can do that. Here. So it's this second part down here. So the applicability was always the existing school. That didn't change. All we added was the word alterations.
And that language is that language in the existing code?
No, this is in the red lines, right? So this
Right,
is
this
in
is all
addition.
new.
This is all new, yes. So this was language added after your January 18th meeting when this issue was raised.
Right.
Through public comment. So this entire sentence is new, and the reason we wanted to highlight the change for tonight that is not in your packet because it came in between when the public comment came in and the start of this meeting.
Got it.
And it was a question of clarification of, outdoor play areas, considered an addition or expansion. And so we thought it would be helpful to add alterations as well to that, just to sort of be broad. But it's not meant to change the meaning.
Okay. Nina, does that give you what you needed to look at?
Yeah, so this is not just Bergamot, this is everywhere. It's just on the same page or something for Bergamot. That's why.
Yeah, that's right. It's everywhere. Yeah. Yeah, it's
Right.
two separate things. Sorry. Yeah, it's not just in the Bergamot area.
Yeah, okay. I saw it before and I thought it was Bergamot, and now I understand. Okay. Thank you.
But there's a background. Okay. So let's move on to the next part of our discussion. I know Nina has a couple issues that she's already mentioned she wants to raise. Do you want to jump into those?
Yeah, let's start with the moderate housing feasibility issue. We don't know for sure what will make moderate housing feasible in Santa Monica, but we do know that 100% moderate housing with ground floor commercial isn't going to be feasible, or that's what we're told. And I don't think that allowing some of that commercial to be market rate housing is much of a change. I think it's a lateral move. So what, I had proposed earlier at an earlier meeting was that 25% of the housing unit could be market rate, and they could also have ground floor commercial. And I think that would maybe push us over the top, and maybe we'll see one of these projects that would have 75% of the units be moderately priced, which seems pretty good to me. So I wanted to know what you guys thought about that.
Yeah, it's tough because we don't know what the financial feasibility of, but it seems like going in that direction provides more opportunity for it to be financially successful.
Opportunity is a big word in this housing element.
Yeah. So in general, I'm not opposed to it, but let's hear Commissioner Fonda-Bernardi.
Yeah, I think we're playing with tea leaves. We really don't know what the economics are. We do know that it would only increase feasibility if it was feasible from the get-go anyway. So I would also be in favor of it because it's stretching the envelope just a little bit.
Okay. Commissioner Tolkien, do you have a comment on that? And I'll get to Commissioner Landers. You're muted, sir. Sam, you're muted.
I tend to agree with Mario on that. If it's feasible, it's going to be more feasible with the moderate housing.
Okay.
Yeah,
anything to add to that?
Well, I mean, again, no tea leaves, and also no real clarity on how these are going to get financed because of the limits of, right, you can't use LIHTC. So what we're saying is that the ground floor may be commercial, and then presumably above the ground floor, though we're allowing ground floor housing in a bunch of places, and we got to come back on that as well, that above the ground floor, theoretically, 25% of the units can be moderate rate. And market rate. Yeah, I mean,
That's their funding.
that's their funding. So do they get? Yeah, I mean, I'm fine. I'm fine with it. I'm trying to. Initially, what we said last week or 2 ago, what I thought we had said was we were comfortable with up to 33% being non-market rate housing, meaning it could be commercial or market rate. So now you're expanding that further, which I don't have a problem with, to say ground floor can be commercial and 25% of the units can be market rate. The question is, what if that exceeds the 33% of the floor area? Are you cool with that?
Yeah, well, for something to qualify as a housing project, 33% of it can be commercial.
Right.
So, and I think the argument that I was making at our last meeting, I actually thought that this was the direction we gave last time. That's how I remember it. And maybe, we just had a grammar, I don't know what happened. But anyway, the argument that I was making at our last meeting was that what was it? Oh yeah, a shared housing project can have up to 25% regular units and still be considered a shared housing project. Correct. And get special benefits. And so why can't a moderate rate housing have 25% of its units be market rate and still get all of the benefits and incentives that a moderate? That was the argument I made last time. So I wasn't counting the 33% of whatever else that is for housing. For housing project.
But it sounds like right now, commissioners, we have an agreement to make a modification to what was done last time. So I don't think we need to beat this one anymore. Take a straw vote. Okay.
Sorry, just so we understand, I'm really trying to follow here. So it's 33% of the project's floor area can be market rate or non-residential. You want to keep that, right? Or not?
Yeah, well,
and in addition to that, 25% of the total residential floor area can be market rate units. So basically, you'd have a project that potentially is, maybe only 50% moderate income, and the rest would be something else, market rate or non-residential. Okay, just want to confirm. Okay.
But I want to confirm, the non-residential can't exceed 33% still.
Yep.
Right.
Right.
And the market rate can't exceed 25%. So the applicant has to do the math. That has to satisfy both of those requirements. 75% of the units have to be market rate, have to be moderate rate, and 67% of the floor area has to be residential. They have to satisfy both conditions. Beyond that, they can do whatever they want.
So if they do the whole building as housing and they choose not to do commercial, it would still be 25% market rate housing.
Correct. They would not be exceeding 33% non-housing. You can do it.
Heidi's here to talk to us.
Sorry, I just have a maybe a follow-up question that might help clarify. As I recall, the way that we understood the motion from the direction from last meeting was that the 33% would be the entire project, meaning the post bonus, right? Couldn't have it on the base entire project. Now it sounds like that might not be the case this time. So it would be like you would need to demonstrate that before you get the bonus that you're entitled to under the 25% would be project and the 33% project. So I just wanted to bring up that. I'm sorry to add on to the layers complexity here, but you had that discussion last time, so I just want to make sure we're clear on the direction for this time.
Can you say that again? Because you cut out and I missed words and I didn't understand.
Pardon. So at your last discussion, the way we understood the motion, you were discussing whether or not the 33% was measured against the entire project, all of the floor area post-bonus, or if the 33% was measured against kind of the pre-bonus project. Right, so I just wanted to make sure that whatever you decide that you want to do tonight kind of factors in that discussion, because as we understood the motion last time, the commission was more comfortable with the idea of the 33% applying to both non-residential and residential floor area because it was post-bonus over the entire project, if that makes sense. And the planning manager would be able to give you more like technical advice on that, but I just was going back through our notes and the way that it was written.
Are we allowed to make requirements like that on housing bonus units?
Well, this is not subject to state density bonus.
This
right?
is a local
so this is
program.
all local.
I see.
And you also voted to have it apply throughout the entire city.
Right.
Right. Yeah, I mean, when they get a bonus, what are they adding?
The bonus is up to 50%.
Yeah, so I think we want that to be post-bonus, not pre-bonus, right? Because if it's pre-bonus, yeah, it doesn't, we're not going to get the right kind of project otherwise.
Yes, I think it's a project could have up to 33% non-residential uses of what, then you'd have 67% residential, of which 25% could be market rate. 25% of those units could be market rate.
Correct. And as much of the 33% as they want can also be housing.
Be housing, right.
Right. As long as the total proportion of market rate housing in the post-bonus project doesn't exceed 25%.
Of the units.
Of the units, not of the floor area. Oh, wait. How do we avoid discrimination? Do we care? Like, we care. How do we avoid 3 penthouse? I mean, like, I guess we don't, because we get 3 rooftop penthouses that pay for the remainder of the.
All of our codes say that when you have mixed income units, they have to be spread evenly throughout the city. Wouldn't that apply to this? I mean, the project, wouldn't that apply to this too?
Program, we probably have to specify that.
I mean, we were willing to sell off. I remember we talked about this. We said, sell the penthouses for what we can get for them in order to pay for the housing below. We were really explicit about that. And if that's what it takes to get moderate income housing, I think people want to be housed.
I'm so busy trying to remember that. I have had just no recollection of that part of the conversation.
We definitely said that, because I actually asked it explicitly, and you or Leslie said, for sure.
That must have been Leslie. Because I would, if I said.
Because that's how you pay for it. No, I mean, these are these really hard conversations, right? I mean, that's how you pay for it. You rent a penthouse for an insane amount of money to someone who's willing to pay, in the hopes that what they pay will help us finance moderate rate housing for hardworking Santa Monicans who, want to have a place to live that's with some dignity and in a decent housing.
I would be inclined to resist that a little bit, and here's why. Even though we can get a lot of money for their market rate up housing at the penthouse level, we can also get more money than we would for the moderate rate, for the moderate ones it'll be just a little less. In other words, if you're at the top, you'll get $10,000 a month, but if you're 2 floors down, you'll get $7,000 a month, which is still more than all the other, let's say, moderate rate units in the project. See where I'm going with this? We're not saying knock yourselves out and just totally discriminate. We're saying you're still going to have a gradient but it's going to be not as big as it was before. Because I would hate to live in a building where there's the gods up there and the rest of us have to scurry around and like pretend like, gee, well, we just don't quite rate. See where I'm going with this? It's sort of
I do. Where I am right now is that there are people who need housing who don't have it. And so at all income levels. And so I want to let the market produce the housing so that we get housed. And when we have more, at the extremes, it's obviously something we want to regulate, but I'm more interested in, how we constrain the Fairmont, right, in terms of collecting more taxes on those apartment units. The reality is that in this market, to get these moderate income buildings built, we're going to have to give a little on the market rate.
Well, we are doing that by including them. We don't really know. I say that we go for the equity distribution method and see if we get any, and then see what we have to do from there. Because
Let's start with the
financial study, and I'm not ready to throw equity out the window.
So I think we have enough consensus here. We want to do it post bonus. We want to do the 25 and the 33, and we want them evenly spread out. And I think if that's a motion, or if that's basically a straw poll, I think we can just move on through this one.
I'll second that motion.
Mm-hmm.
If that's a motion from you, I'll second it.
All right, it is.
Commissioner Fonda Bernardi?
Yes.
Commissioner Fresco?
Yes.
Commissioner Landris?
Yes.
Commissioner Tolkien?
Yes.
And Chair Reese?
Yes. Okay. What's the next topic? Next one I heard was neighborhood council. Or is there something else neighborhood commercial? Was there something we wanted?
Yeah, I'll make a clean motion that we add Pico and Ocean, that the ground floor commercial requirements and active commercial uses be extended to all neighborhood commercial districts.
Second.
Okay, well, let's vote on that first.
Commissioner Fonda Bernardi?
Yes.
Commissioner Fresco?
Yes.
Commissioner Landris?
Yes.
Commissioner Tolkien?
Yes.
And Chair Reese?
Yes.
So another thing that comes up a lot that we've talked about, not specifically during this implementation process, but we've talked at length about it in the past relative to downtown, to the Pico Boulevard, is the whole idea of fine grain commercial, which is a big part of Main Street in particular, but really of Pico Boulevard and Ocean Park also is the idea of fine grain, and the idea of, if you're going to consolidate parcels, to not necessarily make it all one giant corporate commercial space on the ground floor. We got plenty of boulevards for corporate commercial spaces, and if we're really trying to maintain economic opportunity in local community commercial districts, I think we need to also preserve the fine grain to limit them to 50 feet, say. Do I have any thoughts on that idea?
I like the fine grain. The question is 50 feet the right dimension? I just want to have a little bit of discussion there. Is that too big, too small, just right?
Well, that's a standard parcel size. That's why I said it. But I mean, on Main Street, we have lots of commercial spaces that are half that, but
Yeah,
that's okay. You don't need to duplicate that. I think a parcel size is reasonable. And if you're combining parcels to a 15,000 square foot parcel, then you have 2 commercial spaces on your ground floor. Hello?
Well, I'd ask our chair if he has any experience in this apportioning of commercial spaces and the size of the units that you're seeing from your clients, the size of the ground floor units, I mean, how they're giving up.
Yeah, I mean, ground floor commercial is in such terrible shape. Most of my clients these days are lucky to have any tenant at the ground floor. So the 50 feet always seems, we had this on the promenade for a while, right? We had limits on 50 feet, and the goal was to try to keep neighborhood uses. In the end, we had people coming in and asking us for deviations from it because it was so restrictive.
And look what happened to the promenade.
Yeah, is that because of the 50 feet or because every one of us buys from Amazon and it ends up on our doorstep? Okay, hold on. Heidi wants to chime in.
So if I may just kind of make sure that I understand the nexus, I do want to, this is about, housing production, housing incentivizing. I want to make sure that I understand how this is like related to that and make sure that we kind of stay within the scope of what you're doing.
Well, we're making a change that is allowing lot consolidation on neighborhood commercial districts, which certainly on Main Street wasn't allowed before. So we're just trying to maintain the part of the building that is not housing as it was in order to preserve the neighborhood commercial district.
Commissioner Landers.
I had understood that lot consolidation is not permitted in the neighborhood commercial district, which is what the planning manager just told us. But I do think that next.
She said it was limited to 15,000 square feet.
Right.
From not permitted.
Right. The nexus for me is that we're talking about furthering fair housing. And my read of the HCD manual requires us to, when we think about fair housing, requires us to think about what's happening around that housing in order to make sure that that housing is meaningful. I'm wondering whether, because I'm bringing this up and it's another thing we might want to flag for council, we did do quite a lot of work back in 2019 around TICO that was aimed at protecting access to services relevant to to local housing, and I'm wondering whether some of that couldn't be brought back with this purpose. And I don't think we can do it tonight on the fly. It requires rereading the staff reports from May and September of 2019 and figuring out what we want to drop in. But I would encourage staff to do that before this goes to council for final. We voted it forward, so I don't know if it expired. But we've done it. We did the work.
Well, I'm sorry, Don, what are you asking for the staff to do? Or what is it?
Well, we spent a lot of time talking about storefront width with the community, and we talked about preferred land uses, and we actually came up with some, right, we talked about, so for example, if you're talking about storefront width, Commissioner Fresco is correct, the 50-foot storefront width, right now, we have a 40-foot storefront width maximum, but in the code, expanding that to 50-foot would be helpful. And there was a lot of work done that I don't want to take the time tonight to redo when we can all just reread those two staff reports. But there were proposals to make some specific changes to storefront width that reflected significant levels of community input. And we should probably try to honor that rather
So
than.
what you're really saying is go back okay. So now what you're saying is let's not make a decision tonight. Let's go back and review what was done and move that
Right.
forward.
I'm agreeing with Commissioner Fresco that this needs to be considered. So yes. And what I'm saying is we've actually done our homework on Pico Boulevard in large part. And so I think we should use the homework.
Refer back to that prior work.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. Thanks.
Okay. Jing, do we need a motion or something on that for you to look at that and try to include that?
I'm not quite sure what we're being asked to do right now.
So I think what it is that, as I understand it, is there's a concern about the width of the storefront areas. And we were banting about, should it be 50? Should it be 40? John is highlighting, hey, we did this analysis in a kind of a detailed review back in 2019 when we looked at the PICO plan. And so we're asking you guys to go back and dust off that work and see if there was a number used that the community and staff were comfortable with and use that number for the width of the storefronts.
So you want to add a new standard to active commercial design that would limit the width of storefronts, basically.
Well, that's what we were talking about doing. That's what we were talking about doing.
Right?
No.
Well, what are we talking? Then what are we talking about?
The paradox here is that the Pico district, as I understand it right now, currently has a 40-foot limit in most. I'm looking at the staff report right now. I can email it to you. There's a 40-foot limit for a bunch of things. There was a whole other conversation about restaurants that I don't want to get into. I'm just talking about the storefront limits that in mixed-use Boulevard Low and mixed-use, well, that overlay district never came into being. I don't know if it came into being, but mixed-use Boulevard Low was like a 75-foot limit, and peak NC is 40, and we were proposing that Pico go up to 50. And so that work has been done, but it was with respect to very specific uses. So what I'm saying is I agree with Commissioner Fresco, but with respect to at least the Pico neighborhood, there are very finely tuned recommendations that were made in close consultation with the community that this commission already forwarded to council in 2019 that were never acted on by council. And so the motion, I don't know, Nina, work with me on this. Like the motion that I would make is that we recommend, along with our extension of NC to, the active commercial use requirement on the ground floor to all of NC, that we recommend that the council add the storefront width changes that were originally passed by the council in 2019. And they are with respect to very specific uses, but they are actually expansions of storefront widths, not reductions. Just to be clear. I can read them out if it's helpful, but this feels like we're getting into really risky stuff. It's the staff report. For
no,
item A.
I understand what you're talking about. We worked on that for years.
You did,
The issue is I don't think it's actually a standard. Like that was an assessment of like existing conditions. So it was like looking at existing conditions and then sort of like deriving standards from there. That's why I was asking. I was like, are you asking to apply that standard to all of Main Street? It sounds like, or excuse me, to every NC zone in the city.
No.
Not just Pico.
No.
No.
I'm not asking to apply to every zone in the city precisely because I'm arguing that we need
No, to every NC zone in the city. Every NC zone, not every zone.
Oh. Well, that's what I understand it to be. That's what we're, the The NC zone, I'm just pulling up the memo. The original recommendation was to apply it only in what was going to become the PICO overlay district. So I would be very wary of making a recommendation beyond PICO. I don't feel comfortable doing that.
But on Main Street, you weren't allowed to consolidate a lot before now, so storefronts would have been 50 feet, which is why I suggested it for Main Street.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
So are we proposing 50 feet storefronts for Pico and Main Street? Might as well throw Ocean Park in there. But I'm because the Ocean Park zoning is pretty sure it's tighter, but I'm not.
All right. Well, why don't you guys coalesce on a motion here, and let's see if we can.
I think we also need to take a look at, so we just passed economic recovery ordinances that remove CUP processing related to having large tenant spaces or exceeding a certain tenant frontage. And if this is adding a standard, that would limit that frontage, it might be contrary to that policy direction from the council. But we can look at it.
Commissioner Tolkien?
Why don't you tie the storefront footage to the typical lot width in these areas instead of just,
Because
saying,
typical, that we run into a lot of trouble with that. Like even when we look at hedges, they look at the typical thing in the area and they look at all the non-conforming illegal hedges and say, well, there's a lot of hedges here, so we're going to allow it. So I don't feel comfortable with that kind of standard.
Well, wait a minute, Nina, you're saying that, can you clarify that? Because weren't we talking about 50 feet and that's the standard width of most lots in Santa Monica is 50 feet? So.
Right. Well, but but then there could be a non-conforming building, a building that
well, we're getting a lot of chatter here.
Yeah.
Everybody who's not speaking, let's mute. Go ahead. Try that again, Nina.
If it ends up in, the next space that gets redeveloped is the one next to that giant place on Main Street that sells baby strollers now. I can't remember where exactly it is, but it's quite a long storefront and not typical. But if the next building ends up next to that, then you can say, oh, well, it's consistent with this one next door. And but by bit, they get bigger and bigger, and it no longer is neighborhood commercial. It becomes a street of corporate chains again. So I think it has to be an objective standard and not a relative standard. But if Jing is saying that this is in direct conflict with a recent reversal of this type of policy in our economic recovery policy, that's a whole different thing. I think she's looking for it.
Maybe the thing to do is not to focus on storefront width, but to focus on this lot consolidation limitation. Because the lot consolidation prevention in PICO does the trick. And what I think what you're saying is that in Main Street it doesn't do the trick because 15,000 square feet is too big.
Right.
So maybe instead of focusing on storefront width, which might be a moving target in the COVID recovery, why not focus on the bigger picture, which is maybe the lot consolidation limitation should be a smaller number. in, and that may be more defensible also.
Yeah, but we're pretty far away from housing issues right at this moment.
That's
the problem.
And does our resolution of intent allow us to be this far away?
I think that was my earlier question. I do have concerns about this. If you wish to move forward with this, I think we would need to consider whether or not we could advance this to council as being part of your purview at this moment.
Okay.
So I would argue that it is on the grounds of our fair housing concerns and access issues that are related to it, but I don't feel comfortable making these kinds of decisions on the fly. And so my preference would be that, just like some of these other things we've talked about with Live Work, that we flag it for council as a form of direction and ask that it be brought forward for them to study. And, I don't mean to kind of kick it up the chain, but they didn't act on our recommendation in 2019 for a reason, we have to assume. And so, there may be some real procedural reasons why we wouldn't want to move this forward beyond what we've just said, which is applying the NC standards consistently, which I think we can do.
Okay, well, I need one of you two to make a motion and move this forward, because we've spent 35 minutes and it's as muddy as it was when we started.
No, I think we just sort of hashed through a thing and came to the end and realized we can't do it, is what just happened. So that's what discussion is for.
So you're going to make a motion or not make a motion?
Well, I have a new question, which goes back to the time frame issue and why we have to rush this on the 1st of February to council when we have until October the 15th to do this, and why we can't study some of these things a little more carefully. That's one thing. That doesn't help us get our application for a revision to our housing element done more quickly. But, it's just, I'm sorry, I'm going in circles. There's so many. Let me just collect myself a minute. I guess the real thing I want to get to, and I'll just cut to that and forget those other things, is if this is going to council on February 14th and we stick to this rushed time frame, which, has been really complicated, what exactly, we have to do something with neighborhood commercial to make sure we stay in compliance. So we're suggesting that we extend the requirement for ground floor commercial to entirety of NC. Are we going to recommend that council do the upzoning to NC now, even though, yes, you think that's the only way, and then we have this on the books for however long it takes the HCD to get around to looking at our application? Is that what everyone thinks is the right thing?
I saw 2 yeses.
Yep.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure we were all conscious about that.
Commissioner Landers?
I would like to suggest that we get to the resolution itself, and that when we're done with the resolution, Commissioner Fresco or I or somebody else can make a motion to give direction to staff, flag, Live Work, displacement of people living in nominally commercial units, NC lot consolidation, and storefront width issues, to flag these to council with our resolution, with the question of why are we rushing? I'm certainly open to that question, but we need to deliver the resolution to council in its final form and then tell them, here's what we were not able to finish in the time that you gave us. So it's up to you to decide whether you want to move it forward or you want to keep working for another couple of months, but we're not going to walk away without telling you what we think is unfinished. This is what's unfinished. I think we should say that to them, and our chair can communicate that.
Yeah,
but let's get the resolution done.
I think that's fine. I think that's fine. I would urge us to start making motions.
I'm making notes.
Well, let's make motions.
Okay, well then, I want to move. I do want to continue up. I mean, I disagree with. I don't know how other people feel, but I don't see any reason not to do the upzoning in Bergamot that we talked about. I know staff disagrees, but I'd like to flag whether we want to keep that upzoning or whether we want to.
I would say, Sean, we should stick to our guns. Anything that we voted on in the past, and the staff has highlighted as a inconsistency, we should today say, are there things we're willing to back away from, and not re-vote on things that we've told them.
Terrific. Okay, so I'm going to go through. Let me just go through this then. I'm on page 17 of the PowerPoint. I'm going to just go through them and then we can come back. So they don't want us they want us to upzone the neighborhood commercial. They want us not to upzone Bergamot area. They want us not to deal with the downtown AA threshold change that we wanted. They didn't want the ground floor frontages, and they largely, and the live work. I think we folded on live work. I think we folded on frontages because we made a motion about that. So what we need to decide is we need to take a formal vote on upzoning neighborhood commercial. We need to take a formal vote we don't need to re-vote on Bergamot because we already voted. And I don't know if we need to re-vote on the AA threshold, if anybody. That's how I read it.
Okay. I don't think we need to vote on the AA. Okay, Mario, go ahead.
Well, if we're sticking to our guns, we've already done the work. We've already put a line in the sand, and now someone has to come and have the tide adjust that line or not. So I think we're done unless someone is having second thoughts and wants to back off. But as far as I'm concerned, we've done the work. We've given it what we feel should happen.
Then I will move that we upzone the neighborhood commercial district in order to stay in compliance. I'm going to make that motion because I do not want to forward a non-compliant housing element, and I believe that we've been told that failure to do this upzoning motion would create a non-compliant housing element. So for the sake of staying in compliance and having sent our letter saying that we want to amend, I'm going to make the motion to upzone in our final resolution.
Does that mean downzoning Bergamot then as a compensatory? No. Because we can't, like you say, we can't go back.
Oh, to offer Bergamot sure. I'll make that motion. Let's.
To not upzone that? I mean,
no. Yeah.
I don't see why that matters. I think we can do that in good faith. I mean, the way it's been presented to us, that's like 210 units. How can we say no to that?
And again, Sean, I guess I'm not understanding from Sean and Mario why we want to vote opposite on that one.
Because we want to hold that as an offer in the amendment.
Why don't we just give them the offer? Say this is what we did. We
can't. We don't have the leverage for us. So we hold counsel where we think the offer should come with the compensatory capacity. But if we're just trying to uphold a compliant housing element, the way to do that is to send them the staff recommendation on the heights and FARs. And I think Mario's right about that. So I will move both, that we adopt, for the sake of a compliant housing element, the staff's recommendations with respect to NC and CCS.
Okay, so I'm fine with NC, but CCS, we're not going to be out of compliance, are we? We're going to have more units than we had anticipated, so we're not out of compliance. It's only that it was a trade-off leverage.
Yes, and I want to retain that leverage, so I'm going to make that motion for that reason.
Okay, I heard you say it was to be in compliance, and that was confusing to me.
No. It's that there's no benefit. It doesn't.
I hear you now. I got you. And Heidi has something to say. Hello, Heidi.
Sorry, I just want to make sure. I mean, so generally you would be making these decisions on whether or not you think it's appropriate to actually zone a particular area, right? Not as terms of like, I'm going back to, basics here, like rational basis. So I just want to make sure that I understand, and also because of the trade-off, again, wouldn't necessarily be about capacity as we've discussed before, because this is an AFFH issue, right? So I just, so I would urge you to perhaps consider it just kind of independently if that is something that you feel like you would like to recommend in terms of the heights and FAR in that section for reasons that you have previously considered to be important.
Okay, for reasons that we have previously considered to be important and in view of the letter that we sent last week, I recommend that we affirm the staff's recommendations with respect to height and FAR in the NC and the CCS.
Second.
Okay, I have a little problem because I want to vote for one. I don't want to vote for the other. So the way the
Let's
motion
try
is done,
this, and if it fails, let's try this, and if it fails, it fails, and we'll go back to another motion.
okay, fine. It's not the first time. That's fine. Go ahead and call the question.
Commissioner Fonda Bernardi,
Yes.
Commissioner Fresco,
Yes.
Commissioner Landris,
Yes.
Commissioner Tolkien,
Yes.
and Chair Reese.
Very frustrating. I'm going to vote yes because I want a compliant housing element, but I'm upset because housing in Bergamot makes a ton of sense to me, a ton of sense for a lot of reasons that I've talked about in the past, but I'm voting yes.
And I agree, but this is the crazy world we live in right now.
Okay, so we got through with those disagreements. Now, are we going to move on the resolutions and then the outstanding issues that should be looked at?
Yeah. Can I ask a clarifying question here? All right. So where staff disagrees, we now technically are no longer in disagreement on NC or Bergamot area. We are maintaining our recommendation to match the 1 acre threshold. We are not backing down from that, and staff has redlined to send to council on that. I just want to confirm. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. And we are backing off our ground floor frontage recommendation, or we're not? We took it off the
ground floor commercial added to Ocean Park and Pico, but not the size.
No, I'm talking about the frontages, the 3 foot versus 18 inches.
Oh, those. I'm sorry. No, we shouldn't back off.
I thought we moved on that, and we made it part of. You can now ask for a modification to. They were leaving it 18, but you could ask for a modification.
Oh yeah.
And then staff was saying. Then we're saying, well, what about the two sides? And staff basically said, look, it impacts 7 corners or something to that effect. Let's not write a zoning code for 7 corners of our city.
Right.
That's how I remember that.
That's what I think we agreed that we're doing. So I guess that needs a motion for us to undo our former direction, correct? So I'll move that since we withdrew that, I move that we adopt. We previously said we want the minor mod, so we're lowering the and there's pedestrian oriented design has been added to the menu. So just for anybody listening to the record on this is reflecting those 2 changes, but with it becoming a minor mod and the pedestrian oriented design going on the menu, I would move that we withdraw that we affirm the staff recommendation related to ground floor frontages along the commercial boulevards.
Second.
So I have a first by Landers and a second by Fonda Bernardi.
Commissioner Fonda Bernardi,
Yes.
Commissioner Fresco,
Yes.
Commissioner Landris,
Yes.
Commissioner Tolkien,
Yes.
and Chair Reese.
Yes.
And lastly, since there is no red line on the live workspace, there's nothing for us to vote on. Is that correct? there's no formal change.
It's actually included in your resolution as a modification. We didn't draw up actual language, but it is in your resolution as a modification.
Okay, can you point us to where in the resolution it is so we can take a look? In Bergamot, right?
Bergamot Area Plan Resolution would be Exhibit A1.
Attachment J. Modification number 2.
Looking for modification number 1. Oh, I see. At page 153.
Share my screen.
Section B103 to require placement of artists live working in new projects.
She's sharing it on the screen.
Yep.
But I just wanted to note that the idea of replacement is, maybe what we want is an incentive. I don't know. I won't mess with it anymore.
Okay, so I'm going to move. I hate to do it, but I'm going to move that we remove this. That we remove modification number 2 from the resolution on the Bergamot Area Plan.
Are we removing it, or are we replacing it with a request to look into it more deeply at some other time? I mean, isn't that what we said we were going to do?
Yeah, I think we're going to remove it from the resolution, and then we're going to have a follow-up motion that's going to talk about, hey, council, here are some other important things for you to consider.
Yes.
I see. Okay.
Because otherwise we're doing a resolution without a red line, and that's not going to really work.
Okay.
Yeah. So, I hate to do it, but I'm going to move that removal of the modification on remove modification number 2 on page 14 of the Bergamot resolution.
Getting boring. I'll second it.
Okay. Commissioner Bernardi?
Yes.
Commissioner Fresco?
Yes.
Commissioner Landris?
Yes.
Commissioner Tolkien?
Yes.
Chair Reese?
Yes.
All right. Well, then I'll just move the whole darn package. Can we do that in one vote, or do we have to vote 5 times?
Well, let's just
You can do that in one vote, but I would recommend, if you are so inclined, to incorporate any changes that the staff presentation proposed as well, those cleanup changes.
Yes, incorporating the cleanup changes presented by staff at tonight's meeting. I move that the Planning Commission adopt resolution recommending that City Council amend consistency with the 6th cycle housing element, adopt resolution recommending that City Council amend the zoning ordinance, adopt resolution recommending that the City Council amend the downtown community plan, adopt resolution recommending that the City Council amend the Bergamot area plan, and adopt resolution recommending that the City Council amend the general plan, land use, and official districting maps for consistent designation of identified parcel.
And I apologize, one other more clarification. The changes that you voted on with respect to the moderate income housing overlay, I believe, as well.
Yes, and well, we are.
And the other changes that you already decided, yes, right?
And already previously made by the Planning Commission tonight, and in previous evening.
Thank you.
Well, I hate to say this, but I second that.
That was Landris and then Robert Bernardi. Commissioner Bernardi?
Yes.
Commissioner Fresco?
Yes.
Commissioner Landris?
Yes.
Commissioner Tolkien?
Yes.
And Chair Reese?
Yes.
All right. Now I'm going to move, and this we can play with, right? We're going to get this going. I'm going to move that I hate to say direct staff, but that's how it's framed, that we direct staff to convey to council the Planning Commission's unresolved concerns regarding the maintenance of live-work units for artists, displacement protections in live-work units and other non-residential housing for artists and others, consolidation of lot consolidations in the neighborhood commercial district and storefront writs in the neighborhood commercial districts, such that we recommend the council consider these before the October 15th deadline to complete the zoning ordinance updates. Is there a second for the purpose of discussion?
I said second.
Okay. And all of your amendments are friendly, so bring them on.
You are a master tonight. You are so on.
Okay, let's call. I don't think we have any amendments. Call for the question.
Commissioner Fonda Bernardi?
Yes.
Commissioner Fresco?
Yes.
Commissioner Landris?
Yes.
Commissioner Tolkien?
Yes.
Chair Reese?
Yes. Okay. So I think that's the end of that voting, unless I missed something critical here. Congratulations to staff and to us for working on that, and the community for all their input. This is a big effort, not one that we all were overly excited about, but we had to get it done, and I appreciate that. And we still have a couple more. The city still has a couple more bites at the apple for the public. So if you have comments, this will go to City Council. They will review it robustly, and there will be opportunities to speak and to put in comments in the future. So with that, I would like to close this hearing item and move on in our agenda. So I'm looking at our agenda. We have nothing under 7. We do have written communications under we do have a communication under number 8, and I urge the commissioners to review it if they have not already. And then we get to Planning Commission discussion items. Do we have any future discussion items other than the list that we just gave the City Council?
Well, I think we are heading for some sort of solar ordinance or solar access rights ordinance. And I was hoping that at some point we would put a package of, let's say, Green 2.0 that would have the tree ordinance, it would have the solar access ordinance, and whatever else we felt had real leverage on this climate issue. And we would discuss it as a group and, with the appropriate study sessions. So I'm just putting that out there for our future.
And I appreciate that, and I think we all support that. And I believe you mentioned that at least at the last meeting, if not before. Yeah. So hopefully we will see that when staff gets a little breathing room. Okay, then we have public input on non-agendized items. So if
we have, Chair, we have 9A. We have an item.
I'm sorry. Let's open the public comment for 9A.
Can we get a staff report while we?
Sure. We don't have any slides to give you. It's just really, I think, an overview of this. So with the return to in-person meetings pending with your March 1st meeting, and I apologize, my audio wasn't working at the beginning when you were asking that question as to when the commission training will be. We will be setting up probably a few days just to do in pairs to reintroduce you and to introduce some of you who have probably never been in the council chamber, maybe, in pairs to do that training before your March 1st meeting. But that will be your first in-person meeting, and with the end of the COVID-19 state of emergency announced for February 28th, 2023, the Planning Commission and really any other boards and commissions are no longer able to hold teleconference meetings pursuant to AB 361, which authorized meetings without complying with some aspects of the Brown Act. So in preparation for return to those meetings, we wanted to bring your rules of order forward to make sure and, reaffirm some key rules for the return to in-person. We put in the cover memo a couple of rules that you might want to focus on. One is the meeting start time. I know we've all been accustomed to starting these meetings at 5:30. I'm not certain how realistic that is for the commission, with having to physically come to council chambers and City Hall. We wanted to hear from you in terms of whether there was a desire to change your regular 7 p.m. start time, or to keep it. And then I think another suggestion was Rule 17. You had added some special rules over the COVID emergency that were not previously in the commission rules that may be helpful for you to just continue to carry forward in terms of special assistance for those who can't wait to speak, extended time for speakers who require an interpreter, and timelines for accepting written communications. These were new rules that were added over the emergency, but might make sense to continue to carry forward into your in-person meetings. So we attached both your regular rules of order and then the resolution 21012, which modified those for teleconference meetings.
Okay. So, commissioners, do we have comments on? Do we have input on the time, John?
Yeah, so Heidi and I worked on these during COVID, and I guess our next meeting is February 15th, right?
That's right.
And we have quasi-judicial hearings on the 1st, correct?
On March 1st, we do, yes.
So whatever else we change in our rules of order, we need for you in terms of like publishing agendas and stuff and putting ads in the paper, we need to make a decision on the time of the meeting tonight in order for you to make your ad deadline, right?
No. We would just need it, like what we were hoping is you could have this discussion tonight. We would bring back revised rules at your February 15th meeting, which you could, certainly further discuss. But yeah, for the March 1st meeting, it's like 2 weeks prior. Yeah, we would have to have a sense of timing. For the March 1st week, if you did change something, we could default to 7 p.m., but it could change later on, I think.
We'd make it a special?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, do we have input, commissioners, on the time? I'll tell you that working, it's going to be hard for me to get to a meeting at City Hall at 5:30. I would personally prefer to do something earlier than 7. So if it's 6:30 or it's 6, I could probably make. So that would be my preference.
I think there's some wisdom to that because I think the public will have the same problem. Getting there to 6 in person, getting there to 5:30 in person, coming in from work without dinner and all. I think maybe 6 is the right compromise. Because one of the things these earlier starts have done for us beneficially is when we have those long meetings, and hopefully we don't have too many of them, we don't end up at midnight. We get out at 10 or we get out. So there's an advantage of moving up the clock.
I'm good with any start time. I think I wouldn't want to start any earlier than 6. I think 6 is a good number. But does that work for staff? Yeah.
Yeah, we're quite flexible with start time, so.
Okay. Can I kick us off with a motion just to help staff out here that we immediately amend Rule 1 so that their ads can be a regular meeting on March 1st, that effective March 1, 2023, our regular meeting start time will be 6 p.m.
Second.
So if I may just that, but an actual amendment to your rules of order is not on the agenda. It's just a discussion.
Oh, we can't do it. Okay,
right. So just a slight revision to that. If we direct staff to bring it back for that amendment, we can work with that. You can publish an ad with that. We can work with that. I think.
Okay, so
We'll figure something out.
All right, I'll move that we direct. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to move that we direct staff to bring us a amendment to our rules of order, setting our regular meeting start time at 6 p.m. effective March 1st, and that if that change cannot be made timely, that we hold the March 1st meeting as a special meeting starting at 6 p.m., but that we include general public comment in that agenda. That's my motion.
Second.
Commissioner Bondo Bernardi?
Yes.
Commissioner Fresco?
Yes.
Commissioner Landris?
Yes.
Commissioner Tolkien?
Yes.
And Chair Reese?
Yes.
And then I have another question that is not in the staff report. So I'm wondering how you're handling it. So I don't want to go back to the council is having a whole conversation with staff about remote public comment, and I would love for us to be on record. I think we are as favoring the continuation of remote public comment, but I recognize that that's a much more complicated conversation. What I do think we need to address is AB 2449 and the extent to which that the provisions of AB 2449 need to be incorporated into our rules moving forward. That's something that's come up on another commission that I serve on in a different jurisdiction, where such that it's not clear whether what we've been told there is that the AB 2449 provisions are essentially delegated from the elected body. So we get the same benefit that they do, and it's not, but I don't know if that's true in Santa Monica. And that is for people watching, AB 2449 permits a limited number of times or dates when members of the body, in this case planning commissioners, could participate remotely in a meeting without having to, be in an ADA compliant location. Like if we got sick and we needed to, Zoom in. So that's a question for staff, is how we incorporate it into our rules of order.
Yeah, it's certainly something we can look at and bring back information on at your February 15th meeting.
Perfect.
So
I just, I'm sorry to interject, but I'm not sure if we've asked for public comments on this item yet.
Oh, good point. Ironically.
Who's in charge here? Okay, can we get the public comment number up on the screen? And I assume we don't have a speaker just yet, but while we're doing that, I was going to ask a question myself. Staff, we have a rule today that says that people can submit documents up till 12 o'clock, and it'll be reviewed, and then we go on further and say anything submitted after that will be part of the public record. Is that something in front of us now that we can have a discussion about in edits? Because I'll tell you, I do my best to read all those things that come in on my lunch break, but it's really challenging to make sure that I'm up to speed on all of those documents that we're allowing to drop in on the last day. And I would really urge us to put a cutoff date of the night before so that we actually have a time to digest it. Because it's just a difficult situation. And when I have to announce that everything that's been read, it's I choke on that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. That is one of the new rules that was added during your teleconference meetings, and that's why we highlighted it as one of the, I think that the commission didn't really have something in the rules addressing that before, so you could certainly discuss tonight in terms of timelines for accepting written communication.
Yeah,
So
and I don't know.
you absolutely have the discretion to establish an earlier cutoff if you wish.
Okay, so I don't know if commissioners, if you have any concern with this and are supportive of this, but this to me is problematic.
Well, I think it's really problematic for members of the public too, because I mean, I think about, you know, when I want to comment on work of other commissions and I see the agenda, it doesn't always, you know, there's not a lot of lead time for anybody to be ready. And it takes a while to write a letter. And I think that a recommendation, a clearly publicized recommendation that they get their comments in the day before to be sure they're read instead of by 12 o'clock. But I would hesitate to put in an actual cutoff, you know, where people really feel like nobody's going to listen to them if they can't drop everything. You know, people have the same problem you have writing the letters as you have reading them. So it concerns me.
Okay, well that didn't sound supportive of making a change though. So let's hear from at least one other commissioner and see. And if there's not if nobody else has a concern about it, then let's not make a big deal out of it and move on. Commissioner Landers and then Fana Bonatti.
I am not inclined to make a change right now, as hard as it is. I also am a little bit concerned that we not address this until the city attorney has considered the impact of AB 2647, which literally just took effect, related to obligations of municipalities to post anything that's distributed to the members of the governing board, namely us, less than 72 hours before a meeting. So I wouldn't want to make that change without specific guidance from the city attorney about what the law permits and where we have discretion. Because I think we have a lot less discretion than we did even a year ago.
Okay, well, look, the city attorney has something to say about that.
Sure, and I think understand that, and I think what we're hoping to have for you on the 15th is, you know, with some guidance from you all's updates that are necessary for that, but also understanding that the council may be considering some changes to the kind of broader boards and commissions kind of general rules of order as well, just in light of all these changes. But I will say to the chair's earlier point, if I understand his concern, it's making a representation that the commission has necessarily read everything that came in up to a certain point, where I think the intent of that language is more about making sure that it's been posted, that we explain when something has been posted, right, and when something is maybe not going to show up on the agenda posted before the meeting starts. So I think that's actually kind of a lot of what the cutoff is for, but it sounds, if I'm understanding what your concern is perhaps we can address the other part, which is kind of this guarantee that the commission has had an opportunity to read everything. Is that kind of part of the concern?
Yeah, I mean, that's a big part of it, is because I'm guaranteeing it, and it's
right.
The challenge.
Right.
We can look at that part. Absolutely.
Right. And if I may, I mean, this was an interesting thing today, right? We had technically so it worked, but it should have worked better. The staff actually made changes to the resolution based on the letter from Ms. Larmore came in after 12 noon. At least that's when it posted to my account. And by 5:30 p.m., staff was ready with, you know, some of those corrections. That's actually great because there was public review of that discussion. But I can imagine a situation where a letter comes in and staff wants to make those changes and they're not as non-controversial as these particular changes were. We need to be really sensitive about that. And make sure that there's some public airing out. So I would urge us to find some middle ground that protects, you know, that keeps the sunlight on. This was a good resolution, but it could be more fraught next time.
Okay.
No, I just let me add my 2 cents where these are kind of sense motions. Is I would love to have more time to read stuff. In a sense, in this particular meeting, the staff did a lot of work for us. They said, here's all the stuff we agreed on. So I fortunately didn't have to read all that. And then here's the areas where we disagree. And I definitely had to read those because that's what we were going to be discussing. But the point I'm making is that we might not always be in a situation where we have such a beneficially formatted by the staff of the issues we need to really chew on. And so I would love to have more time to look at things, to really drill down, to do some even emailing to the staff. What does this mean? How do you interpret this? In other words, giving us a little more time to be prepared for the meeting by getting things, let's say, 24 hours before the meeting as opposed to 4 hours or 6 hours, whatever it is now.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of expanding it a little bit, right? Because you're talking about the actual staff report, and I was just talking about kind of comments from the community who are reviewing the staff report.
Right.
Yeah,
Sometimes those are extensive. Sometimes you look at the list and it's intimidating. It's great that people are submitting, but if you had to read all those letters and all those things, you're not going to get the text of the staff report.
Okay, so I don't know what to do with that though, because again, that's pushing up. That's almost calling for having the staff reports to us earlier, so we have more time to review.
No, I was talking about when we agree that we're going to read all of the public input instead of saying we're going to read it by noon, or we stop reading at noon, basically. I think we can say no, we're going to stop reading if we're going to 6 o'clock, at 6 o'clock the day before, and that gives time to actually read all the stuff.
Right. Okay. Thank you for the clarification. I was misinterpreting that, and I would be supportive of something like that. But Commissioner Tolkien, I think we need to hear you weigh in on this, and you're going to have to unmute. Sam, Mr. Tolkien, you are muted.
I don't have any problem with the change in timing. Getting more reading time would be great. Whatever we can do to stop, to change so that we can have as much time before that commission meeting to read all of this. Some of it is very repetitive, but obviously the letters from neighbors and stuff.
Yep. Yeah, it's all important, and we want to make sure that we have the time to digest it. So I think the direction to staff is to consider options for this when you bring this back to us on the 15th, and we'll have 2 more commissioners who will fill out the conversation. Because Nina's right. It is a challenge for the community to write these letters as well. And it is a balancing act, but let's hear some alternatives next on the 15th, and then we'll hear from our other commissioners. We'll make a decision. What other rules of order? Okay, Commissioner Landers.
I'll just keep it fast. I don't know if this is the place to do it, but I would like, given that the council is still working on these general rules of order for boards and commissions, and that the planning commission is one that exists under California statute. I would like us to communicate our strong preference for finding a way to continue remote public comment. I mean, I want to maximize the public's access to our work, and I know that won't happen in a perfect way. I'm aware of the conversations that have been happening, at council, but to the extent that we have certain status as the planning commission that's very different from advisory commissions, I think it's really important that we are as broad-based as possible with our access to public comment, and that we be strongly on record favoring, when resources permit, and that resources be found, that we permit both in-person and remote public comment. Looks like we have somebody calling in, maybe. I don't know.
I'm supportive of that.
We do have a caller in the queue, if I may invite them in.
Fantastic. Please bring them in.
Last four digits, 6710. You're now in the meeting and you'll have 3 minutes to make your comment. If you could please state your full name and then proceed.
Hello, caller. We can't hear you.
I'm sorry. I believe that's actually Jing. She got disconnected from her audio, so.
Well, we'll let her comment too.
Yeah.
Okay. Very good. Well, do we have any other calls on this?
No, we do not.
Okay. So I think the other one in front of us, their staff was typically asking about Rule 17 and about special assistance. Are there edits that we want to make there? I mean, I think we do. We've always accommodated people who had kids or had some reason, legitimate reason why they had to get out of there early. I can't remember what we had before, but we should go back to what we had in the past. Staff, do you have exactly what that language was, or can you look at that and bring it back to us on the 15th?
The language, yeah, for those who cannot wait to speak, it's actually in your resolution. It's a rule in that the second resolution, 21012, and it's Rule 17 F. So it says members of the public, including those with special needs or without technological resources, teleconference, but cannot wait to speak on an agenda item. May request assistance from the director, and a member of the division will provide assistance in preparing a written statement of testimony for distribution to the commission. But it sounds like you might be looking at having them be able to speak earlier in the evening. Is that right? Is that the intent?
Well, I'm trying to understand. I'm trying to remember what we did in the past because we accommodated people. Was it we did it early in that agenda item? I think it was probably we did it early in the agenda item, early on the agenda.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes some sense to do that. Attach it to the agenda item itself. Okay. Any other issues staff wants us to comment on, or commissioners you reviewed through the document and wanted to make comments on? Mr. Landers.
Sure. I'm just thinking of, I mean, one thing we might consider is moving our general public comment to the top of our meeting. We want to allow people who have non-agenda related matters. We could certainly allow them to give their comment at the beginning of the meeting. And I think our people needing assistance or kids or other things was that the idea they get to skip the line. Not that we take public comment at 2 different times during the agenda item, but that they get to go to the top of the line. But I do think in the spirit of what you're talking about, we could move our general public comment to the top of the meeting, the way council does now.
Yeah, that seems a little friendlier to the public. So I'm okay with that. Anybody else have any strong feelings one way or the other?
Sounds good. I think we should have snacks.
They used to.
So that would
coffee.
Yeah.
That would override your prior the prior one, right? So for speakers who cannot wait to speak, you'd like to move them to the beginning of the meeting before the items are called.
No.
Right, and not have it earlier in the item, or you want both?
I think what I heard, Sean's main point was agenda item, which we have 10 tonight, which is public input on non-agendized items. Move that to the top of the agenda. Then he clarified that his memory was when we were allowing people to speak early, they got to speak early in the public comment of an item. When I talked to you about it, I talked about two things. One was early in the meeting. I said I didn't want that, but then I said early in the agenda item. But that's not really what I meant. I meant what Sean was saying, which is when public comment opens, they would be able to go to the front of the line. So it's almost as if there was two distinct issues there.
Did we just always do that in the past without a rule for it?
Thought we had a rule, but it was.
Right. I just looked at your rules of order. It doesn't appear that was in there. It's not necessarily inconsistent with your rules of order. The public comment provisions were actually kind of sparse. So you'll notice when we bring back these black lines that there was a lot of detail that was added during the COVID emergency. Like with respect to translation, extra time for translation, those sorts of things that you will see that we're going to propose bringing them over because they're just kind of technical practices that you have been engaging in. So I do think you probably engaged in that practice without it necessarily being written down because it really wasn't as specific as your current resolution is.
Okay. You know, something you just said made me think of kind of things that we see when talking about public comment that we see happening in other large cities near us where there is a ton of hostility and foul language and negativity spewed at public hearings. And that entity has decided that they need to allow that for free speech. We don't have that problem yet, but I'm wondering if there's anything we should be thinking about. Or I shouldn't say it's a slippery slope. I mean, it's a tricky subject.
Sure.
Great. Okay, anything else on this one, team? Great. Okay, staff, do you need anything else from us on this one? We don't appear to have any more comments for you.
No, I don't think so.
Okay, great. Now I'm going to jump to agenda item 10, which is public input on non-agendized items. If we could run our timer.
We did not receive any calls.
Okay, well, then I want to thank everybody, and we come to the night for time to adjourn the meeting. But before we adjourn, what I'd like to do is I'd like to adjourn the meeting in the memory of David Lambert. We did not have one of our fellow planning commissioners here tonight, Leslie Lambert, because she was back with her brother who passed away 2 days ago, and we're very, very sorry to hear this. We give our thoughts and prayers to Leslie and her family, and I would like to adjourn this meeting in his memory and hope that their family does as well as they can with this situation. So with that, thank you all, and we will see you all in a couple of weeks.